although we've had a sort of few ups and downs getting here, you've freely agreed to come and give evidence, unlike some other people who tried to get in this inquiry, and we've not had to summons you. You're here because you accepted the invitation of the committee, and we're grateful for that. I know in your correspondence on Friday, you referenced that you intended to lodge an appeal against the Electoral Commission's decision. I just wanted to check whether, and I think you were expecting to do that today.
Yes, it's lodged at 10 a.m.
That's fine. Okay. I sure understand under the circumstances, and it's not particularly core to our inquiry anyway, but as it's now really sub judice, we won't be asking you any questions about the Electoral Commission's investigation or your appeals, and that should be properly dealt with separately. So it's not ground we're looking to cover this morning.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
In light, Mr. Chairman, of the fact that, according to Guido, that you had some hospitality from Putin's #1 man in United Kingdom, do you not think you're a bit conflicted quizzing us about this today? So I wanted to make a suggestion. Perhaps you might want to recuse yourself and then let one of the other people take over as chairman. So resign, so you can actually ask us questions independently.
Well, it's a nice try. It's a nice try, Mr. Wigmore.
Well, it's just like...
you may have better intel than me. I didn't know that Roman Abramovich was Putin's #1 man in London, but you may know more than I do. But all I can say is, I got invited to the football. I didn't meet the owner, and I wasn't offered Stalin's vodka or so I'm not as good at pushing their buttons as you are.
But Damien, you do know how it looks. That you have hospitality, or you meet Russians and then people write terrible things about you.
Yeah, I know. But
anyway, I just mention it.
Well, there's also another issue. Another issue is very important.
Well, no, I don't think we want to get too distracted before we.
No, I think let's start as we mean. Start as we need to go on. And what I can say is that I have declared the register of members' interest my acceptance of 2 tickets to go and watch Chelsea play Crystal Palace, and I can say that there were no inducements, offers, shares in gold mines. Nothing transpired at that football match which would give this inquiry any cause for concern.
But, no honey traps?
No honey traps. No, nothing at all. It was all very. Chelsea won 2-1, and that was it. That was the extent of the entertainment. But,
okay, accepted.
Okay, so let's start off on the questioning, and I would like to start really on. Sorry,
I really declare my small interest that I mentioned to you earlier. That at one point, this is an interest just to cover ourselves legally, that at one point you were going to stand against me in Clacton. And
I think it was for the day.
We have no connection apart from that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there are any other declarations of interest, so we'll start the session. I wanted to start off really with the issues really that led us to initially inviting you to give evidence, and indeed actually you requesting to give evidence during the session with Alexander Nix. So I just really wanted to, just for the benefit of the record and for the benefit of our inquiry, just to sort of cover off some of the questions around Cambridge Analytica, which I know you are obviously very familiar with. Brittany Kaiser said to the committee that the initial introduction made to link you with Cambridge Analytica was made through Steve Bannon. Is that correct?
The initial introduction was through Steve Bannon, yes.
Yeah. And did you have a relationship with Steve Bannon before that time, or did he reach out to you?
I met Steve Bannon on 2 occasions. He was obviously involved in Breitbart, and knew Nigel Farage quite closely, and I met him twice in London. Yeah.
Yeah. And Robert Mercer's obviously heavily connected with that organisation as well. Is he someone that you know? Have you met?
I've never met Robert Mercer.
Okay, that's fine.
He's a friend of Nigel's.
Yeah. Do you remember when you had first contact with Cambridge Analytica? Do you remember when that was?
I don't have the exact timeline, but I'm pretty sure the way it's been reported is correct.
Yeah. So at some point, probably earlier in 2015, would that be correct? Yeah. And did you, at that time you were obviously thinking about the role Leave.eu would play in the referendum. Had you started thinking about the sorts of services Cambridge Analytica could supply? Were you actively looking for a company that could work with you to provide expertise on data analytics?
Yeah, it was proposed that they were experts in, as you say, data analytics, and we spoke to them. They made a pitch to us. And I think as the pitch, I know we're not allowed to talk about the Electoral Commission, but their report, I think, shows no evidence that we went ahead with the pitch, and that's the case.
But was it your intention to do so, that if you'd been successful in securing the designation, that you would have used them.
Yeah, we put it into the designation document that went to the Electoral Commissioner as record.
Yeah, and there was some talk about, I think Dominic Cummings has written about this in his blog yesterday, about...
I don't think you can believe everything Mr.
No, I was saying, when he talked about...
I think in the same blog he recommended I was thrown down a mine shaft, so I'm not really...
No, exactly. He said some pretty...
I used gold mine shaft.
Exactly. He's had some comments about me as well, so on his blog. But,
we've got that in common at least.
One thing I want to ask about, there was some talk, I think you I think advocated whether Leave.eu and Vote Leave should become one organisation rather than two competing organisations. Ran in the new year 2016.
Well, I think there was a lot of heat around the fact there were two campaigns. A lot of donors, a lot of Conservative MPs, others thought that it would be better to try to have a united front. Actually, as it turns out, I think it's fairly well on the record, we despise Dominic Cummings, Matthew Elliott and the other people that tried to turn it into part of the Tory party. I mean, from our perspective, Vote Leave was a sort of an attempt to kind of own the referendum from the Tory Brexiteers' point of view and exclude UKIP and the other participants. So we were certainly not very friendly with that.
Yeah, but you would have, and one of the things Dominic Cummings cites is that he disagreed with your use of Facebook data, the way you were using Facebook data. Presumably that was the model that had been proposed by Cambridge Analytica.
Well, I mean, we built up a huge social media following, both on Facebook and Twitter. I think over 1 million people followed us. We had huge engagement, but that was internally generated. We did not use Cambridge Analytica. And it's quite interesting, actually, if you go to Dominic Cummings and Tim Shipman's definitive work on the referendum. He actually says that Dan Hannan said that Vote Leave scraped Google data and sent it to a team of astrophysicists on the West Coast. I mean, I think this is just demonstrable nonsense. So I think there's a lot of myth around some of these things, and that's one of my big issues with some of the output of the committee, taking witnesses and the evidence given, and then it turns into almost fact. I mean, you mentioned Brittany Kaiser at the beginning of that. She's now subsequently said that she was sent by Cambridge Analytica to see Julian Assange. She was sent there to give them, I think, cryptocurrency to hand on to WikiLeaks. So what we would maintain is a number of these kind of key, honest whistleblowers that were put in front of the committee as decent, upstanding employees that were going to, change the world by telling the truth. You've got her saying she went to see Julian Assange. You've got Chris Wiley, the other guy, has recently come out and said he's been in receipts of our stolen emails that appeared in the Sunday Times for 3 months, and that this evidence has, been sent to US intelligence and British intelligence. If you see it from our point of view, there's been a whole inquiry into Cambridge Analytica, which has led on to an Electoral Commission investigation, onto an ICO investigation, and it's been conflated from two witnesses that, frankly, the credibility of them are shot to pieces. I mean, Brittany Kaiser held a press conference the day after appearing at this committee to launch her own business called Rest in Peace Data Theft. So you can see it from our point of view. These are not particularly credible witnesses, but they've been, cloaked in a sort of, these were great whistleblowers. The Guardian have written fabulous stories off the back of all this, and in fact, they're all committee-type characters.
Well, but that's
I'm sorry, but that's I'm just.
But you're entitled to your point of view, and part of the reason for
thank you, by the way, for letting me express that. I think it's useful. We can talk about these things.
But part of the reason for inviting people like yourselves to come and give evidence is that so that you can, as part of our inquiry, we can put to you issues that we've received and give you the chance to respond to them, which is what we're looking to do today.
Can you see what I'm saying?
I can see what you're saying, and obviously for us, because Brittany Kaiser was someone that was, shared a platform with Leave.eu at the launch and was working directly on the campaign. It's obviously of interest to us when allegations are made about that to talk to some of the people that were actually doing that work and hear what they have to say. But obviously we want to hear your views on that as well.
I just merely say that subsequent to their appearance, their credibility is somewhat shot to pieces by their somewhat fantastical statements they've made afterwards. They enjoyed their time in the limelight, and they've obviously, conflated quite a lot from it.
So obviously that's your view, and you've expressed it, and you're entitled to it. But when did you first start discussing with the Cambridge Analytica team the way in which you could use data held by your insurance company to create data models?
We had two or three meetings with them, and it became clear to me that, as is true in a lot of politics, there's a lot of sizzle and sometimes not a lot of substance. So it became clear that what this company really is an advertising agency, which I think is what Nick's actually said, that then did a little bit of politics on the side. And we became increasingly concerned that their services they were offering were just an advertising agency.
It's worth noting that when you market an insurance company, by the way, the insurance company and Cambridge Analytica, we never discussed the same things. We never involved an insurance company in Cambridge Analytica ever. But when you're an insurance company, it's marketing. So if you take a look at how marketing works, you're talking about pay-per-click, Google ads, all these kind of mechanisms that you use to market insurance products. We were very skilled at that. We've got years of understanding of that. All we did was apply that knowledge in marketing for insurance to the referendum initially, to the campaign, because that's all we knew. What we decided to do is try and go and find the best people we possibly could in the world. So we looked at an organisation called Goddard Gunster, which I think you're familiar with, in the United States. All they do is referenda. That's all they do. And here we believed that Cambridge Analytica were perceived certainly as one of the best campaigning companies, political campaigning companies. So of course we looked at them. The truth is, our marketing people and the people we had around us probably knew more than they did when it comes to actually trying to get that message across. They're skilled in insurance marketing. We took that knowledge, which we both deeply held, and applied it to the campaign.
I think you go back to what you said about the two campaigns. I think we actually won the referendum because there were two campaigns. The Vote Leave was a kind of soft Tory appeal to the kind of middle class kind of voters. We were very much appealing to more the sort of Labour voters, where immigration was a big issue.
Yeah.
So I think in the end, maintaining two campaigns was, a very valuable thing.
Could you ask, when you were discussing with Cambridge Analytica all the work we've done looking at the way they work so far, obviously Aggregate IQ have been one of their key partners. They'd worked with them consistently really from the beginning of 2014 through to the start of the regulated period for the referendum itself. Had they discussed bringing AIQ in to work with them on the campaign if they were hired by you?
It's not something I had heard of.
Me neither.
Yeah. But did they, also the key service that AIQ provided, they created various tools that help take the different data elements and can turn them into the data sets that can be used for targeting, and that would seem to be a skill that Cambridge Analytica bought in from them, and therefore I wondered who would have done that if they'd worked for you.
I think that was very much my point on Alexander Nix, that I think they were huge marketing people that claimed to do all sorts of things, but actually what they were an ad agency.
Quite simple what they were doing, really.
But so, it's not uncommon, is it, for people that offer these kind of services to, and I think as we saw with the Channel 4 expose, he made all sorts of, claims, of what his company could do. Whether it actually transpired it did or not, I don't know.
So
but I got the definite feeling that they were a kind of ad agency that kind of had surrounded this mystique around.
You see, this idea that you can hypnotise people is rubbish.
Yeah. Well, what about the role? Obviously, a key part of the way they work seems to be psychographics. And Alexander Nix has spoken throughout 2016 at various conferences and afterwards about psychographics being one of the additional things that they bring, and also their ability to analyse and so psychological profiling.
Oh, sorry.
Was that something that? Because obviously you've got data. I mean, you've got insurance data. You've got data you can work with. But did he talk?
We never used insurance data. There's nothing to do with insurance data. We never touched insurance data.
Okay.
What I will say is that we had a team of people that worked specifically on creative advertising. I'm sure you're familiar with some of our work. Some people may not like it, but in terms of the actual stuff we were putting out, we did our own sort of micro messaging, if you liked. I mean, I'll give you an example. We put out a tile that was targeted at green voters, which is not something you would think would have any traction. But then we looked at, let's say, for instance, poor African countries that can't export their goods into the UK. And so what we would do is target individual groups. So we did that, but we didn't use this kind of, mythical data to do it.
What was on the pitch doc, on the sort of phase 1 document
Yeah.
that was published, that Brittany published? But there are sort of 3 core elements to that. There's UK. Sorry, I don't know who took the photograph, but we had this problem last week, just to say that no photographs are allowed to be taken in the room. So hopefully that went off by accident, but we make sure there are no other photographs taken. There are 3 elements in that phase 1 document. There's information coming from UKIP. There's data that's been gathered by Leave.eu. There's also then information from Eldon Insurance. So what was in their presentation to you? What were they suggesting you did?
So I think the sequence. Sorry. Yes, fine. So I think the sequence of events there was I went to the meeting and I wore several different hats because you don't disconnect your different businesses and the things you're doing. You really don't. So effectively what happened was when they started talking about how you psychologically profile, how you look for a niche kind of customer, immediately in my head the kind of process, insurance is all about how do you target your product to the person you want to target it to. And so the 3 things that were of interest to me were obviously the referendum campaign, my insurance business, could they offer services that were along those sort of lines, and thirdly, with the UKIP hat on, would it be a useful messaging tool for UKIP? And I see I can see why you would think there would be a conflict, but actually there really isn't.
Well, I suppose it's one of the things that, depending on how you manage that situation, there could be a conflict. That's why the question arises.
It's important to manage conflicts,
and to separate those different roles, because clearly it would be a matter of interest if company insurance data was being used for political targeting. That way.
Exactly. But the point I'm making is that we're now sitting around a committee with a lot of hindsight here. I mean, we were just having a casual conversation with this company, and then they almost came back and said, well, these are the 3 areas we can look at. The fact of the matter is, we've got to be very careful that, in examining all this, we don't jump from one conclusion that you had a discussion about it to it happened. Because all 3 of the things you've talked about didn't happen. And it's a bit, it's a bit like even with the gold mine stuff, which I'm sure we're going to come on to. There's a definition between having a meeting with somebody, passing it on to someone, and it not going anywhere. Are we really saying that we can't have a conversation, and then it has to be, this is the whole Guardian thing, that if I meet you for a glass of wine, there must be some dreadful conspiracy.
Or if you go to a football match.
Or football match, but there's been no actual definitive evidence of anything.
Well, that's
one shred of evidence, so that's the thing that I find frustrating.
Well, that's why I chose one was carefully in asking the question, asking about what they pitched to you, what they proposed, not necessarily asking you to clarify that situation.
If you were them, Mr. Chairman, you had an opportunity, and remember the timing of this as well. The referendum hadn't even been called. Everyone was still thinking, is it going to happen? Is Cameron going to come back with a deal? No one really knew. So when you were a company like them, you're pitching to a businessman, you're thinking, what can I get out of him? Yes, there's a referendum, and there's possibly work for his insurance company. So from their perspective, you could see why they were.
I understand you work for Saatchi & Saatchi. I'm sure you made plenty of speculative pitches to clients on how to give the services of Saatchi & Saatchi. I mean, that's how business works.
It was a simpler time.
Well, of course, yeah. Right. I'm probably more enjoyable time.
But obviously, where they pitched it to you was they said their document, Cambridge Analytica believes that the integration of several different projects will reduce costs. So when they're talking about integration of projects, are they looking at there are 3 potential strands of work which can be managed separately, but by one team, or are they saying these can actually, you have 3 projects that could become one project?
I think anyone involved in politics knows it all starts getting very confusing very quickly. I mean, from our point of view, what we've said is we've had some initial discussions with Cambridge Analytica. We didn't take up their services. So I'm struggling a bit to the line of questioning because we didn't go ahead with these things.
Yeah. Why did you take such great exception to what Alexander Nix said when he first appeared in front of the committee about his relationship to you, to your company? I
don't. I felt a bit sorry for him on the second outing, I have to say. But I think...
Well, on the first outing, I mean, you were quite
Well, just remind me again of what he said, if you could.
Well, I mean, because we asked him about the fact that Andy Wigmore, you'd said that on Twitter that that you'd brought in Cambridge Analytica to work, and what a good what a good decision that had been. Yeah. You talk about it in Bad Boys of Brexit as well, about bringing in hiring Cambridge Analytica. You clarified what you meant by that, but he was when he seemed very keen to distance himself completely from that period. Those, and you seem to take considerable exception to that.
Well, I think one thing that is clear is when you're telling the truth, it's much easier to tell it than trying to torture yourself into all sorts of knots. And one of the issues I had with them was at one point the verbal offer they made, to say, well, if you pay us £1 million up front, we'll raise 5 million. And it struck me at that time, that's when really it clicked that it was a bit of a fraud. And I think subsequent conversations and discussions you've had with that show a lot of that as well. I think he himself, did he not say that, he made stuff up, in front of clients and
lied, I think he said, actually. Was it?
Did he say he lied?
He said he lied, yeah.
Well, okay, he lied. But so that, I think, for me, was a strong indication that this was an ad agency that basically was just overplaying its hand. And so that's probably why I was pretty angry with him. But subsequently, I felt a little sorry for him in the second meeting.
Okay. Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, good morning. When Cambridge Analytica was pitching to you, did you give Cambridge Analytica any data?
The only data that was ever sent to Cambridge Analytica was some UKIP data from them, because they wanted to do an exercise from Cambridge Analytica. And I understand that they did some initial scoping work. They then whacked in a bill for £39,000, I think, for
41,500.
How much?
41,500.
Inc.
I'm sorry?
They whacked in the invoice anyway, go on.
I don't, whether the invoice is 39,000 or 41,000 doesn't seem to me neither here nor there. It's irrelevant. So, but the point is, they put this invoice in, which UKIP said, no, you're meant to be doing a scoping exercise. I think they approached me to pay it, and I said, not on your life.
Did you give UKIP any data?
Sorry?
Did you give UKIP any data?
No, that was UKIP data they sent.
Can I? Because obviously, Mr. Banks, you made your name in a sense as through UKIP as being a big UKIP donor.
Yeah.
That's how you came to public prominence. How do you sort of demarcate your role within UKIP at that time, as opposed to your role as it became with Leave.eu?
I never had a role in UKIP.
Some of them didn't like you very much, did they?
I think most of them didn't like it very much. I mean, we wanted to try and professionalise the party. That was something that was going to prove extremely difficult to do. So I had no role within UKIP.
But you were a donor to them,
yes.
Other than being a donor.
Yeah.
Did you ever talk, sit down and discuss strategy with them?
With Nigel, we talk strategy all the time.
Mm. So let me just follow on then. From
Do politicians not do that?
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I would hope so.
I mean, sometimes the strategy worked spectacularly, sometimes it didn't, really.
So let me just, because we've had several explanations over this relationship with Cambridge Analytica. So I think Mr. Banks, you tweeted, well, originally we said, on October in the book, we said we've hired Cambridge Analytica, as the chairman just referred to.
To clarify that, what had happened was we did put them into the designation document for the Go movement. So I know this gets horrendously complex, but you started off with the No campaign, and then the referendum people changed the name of the referendum, Leave to Remain. So the name no.eu had to go, then it became leave.eu, and then effectively we teamed up with a number of other campaign groups to put in an application for the Go movement. And so when we said we hired Cambridge Analytica, maybe that was, a better choice of words could have been deployed there. The fact was, we didn't hide it. We put it in the designation document and said if we win the designation we will use Cambridge Analytica. Now, did we hire them? Clearly not, because we didn't, pay them or sign a contract.
Right.
So I would agree that choice of word could have been better.
I think you tweeted, Mr. Banks, we made no secret of using Cambridge Analytica we created a huge social media artificial intelligence won it for leave. That was in January of... I think, Mr. Wigmore, you then told the Observer, Cambridge Analytica, were happy to help because Nigel is a good friend of the Mercers, and Mercer introduced them to us. He said, here's this company we think may be useful to you. What they were trying to do in the US and what we were trying to do had massive parallels.
Well, I think Mercer and Bannon were obviously very close. We did meet Bannon. We make no secret of that.
We never met Mercer.
Right. So then we move on to the relationship with Cambridge Analytica was then again. I think this is you, Mr. Wigmore. Cambridge Analytica did no work for us formally, and if they had, it would have been way before you had to report expenditure. I think that's what you were getting at before. We never employed Cambridge Analytica, and they never gave us anything in kind. And then we have Cambridge Analytica provided initial help and guidance to the Leave.eu campaign, which then went on to develop its own artificial intelligence and analysis methodology. The AI machine learning was developed in Bristol by 20 mathematicians and actuaries, with input from Cambridge Analytica at the very beginning and then executed by Goddard Gunster. And now we've got to the point where Cambridge Analytica is simply an ad agency.
It is.
In the words of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, is that your final answer? Or is it?
Can I phone a friend?
Very good. So is this now the definitive version of your...
I think... go on, Andy.
Well, I think, to be honest, there's probably a bit of boastfulness. I'm an agent provocateur. My job is to spin. You're familiar with all that. And so I would be guilty of being provocative, an agent provocateur, slight exaggerating in the message quite often. And I'm guilty of doing that, absolutely. But the truth is, and the reality is, what the mechanics of actually what happened, we put out in a document. It wasn't something that we were trying to hide. You could have read it. Did we use Cambridge Analytica for the pitch? Absolutely. Did they do some work to get to that pitch? Of course they did. They had to, because if we had won, it wouldn't be kind of like right now plan. They had to do a certain amount of planning just in case we won. So there's a lot of that groundwork which had to take place. That's just a reality.
Using the agent provocateur, we were a disruptive campaign, and we certainly weren't above leading journalists up the country path, making fun of them. Same with politicians. The same way I refer back to, if you do manage to get Dominic Cummings to the stand eventually, the idea that there were astrophysicists in California, working in some skunk works, for Vote Leave, scraping Google data, is fantastical. And that's something that Dan Hannon said. So I think, you have to take a slight pinch of salt, because we were running a campaign deliberately aimed at, making fun of people, pushing them in certain directions.
We were outsiders.
Disruptive.
When we started, I think our first lunch was Mr. Pickard there. And he will tell you, he hadn't a clue who we were. Nobody had a clue who we were. Apart from perhaps that Mr. Banks had given a lot of money to Nigel Farage and UKIP. But to try and get a share of voice and try and create a movement and try and create a noise, you have to do certain things to get attention.
And in the context of this inquiry, does that include perhaps using fake news to shake people up?
What's fake news?
Well,
every politician, with great respect, every politician uses the best placed position of a situation to try and create the best environment for someone to write about it. If that's fake news, then that's what we do. But fake news it can come in many forms if you want to examine it like that.
I would say, Chris, that Parliament itself is the biggest source of fake news in the entire country.
Well, I'd hope I could disagree with you on that one. But
straight after this meeting, you'll be at lunch with some Guardian journalist, quaffing a glass of Chablis and spinning it the way you want to spin it.
If only that was the case. Did Goddard Gunster with any of the data that had been processed by Cambridge Analytica?
Goddard Gunster don't do data. How they operate is to work out what is the best way of placing messages in certain places. That's not about data. That's much more about marketing and looking at data, analysing data which you'd have to hand to them. That's how they operate. And the United States is very different because of just the way that campaigns work and what you can do with negative advertising, positive advertising, do all of that.
I think I want to. If I look at it from our perspective when we first started the campaign, we look at all of the advantage the Remain campaign had. They outspent us 2-1. They had the civil service working for them. They sent a leaflet to everybody in the country. They got the IMF, they got President Obama, they had the government working, they had every possible advantage to win this referendum. They ran a lousy campaign threatening people, and when we started our campaign, we realised to get a share of the voice, that what we had to do was be slightly alternative, but tease journalists. You know, I mean, they're the cleverest, stupidest people on earth, because actually they're clever, but also they really want to believe some of this stuff. So we were not above, using alternative methods to sort of punch home our message or lead people up the garden path if we had to.
But also, the piece of advice we got right from the beginning was, remember, this is referendum are not about facts, it's about emotion. You've got to tap into that emotion. It doesn't matter how many facts you throw at, it's white noise to people, because people are voting on something they believe and feel emotionally.
Who gave you that advice?
Goddard Gunster. They had run the successful referendum right across the United States.
They had a 93% hit rate in America. If we go back to what I was saying, when you had the emergency austerity budget, everyone will be £4,000 worse off. There'll be 500,000 job losses on the day the referendum starts. I mean, actually, if you think about it, the Leave campaign was outgunned in every possible way. You had the battleship of a campaign, but you chose the wrong strategy. And the reason you did that was you didn't understand the underlying issues that were driving the Brexit referendum. And I think when you look at it, I think we did understand the issues better, and therefore we tailored our campaign to achieve those goals.
Well, let me just ask you one more question. And we talked about these astrophysicists in California.
Tim Shipman does, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But you talk about Bristol. You have 20 mathematicians and actuaries. Who were they? Where did you get them from?
Slightly conflated that we do have an artificial intelligence team and big data analytics working on our insurance business, but none of them were deployed in the referendum campaign.
So the where actuaries, I think Mr. Wigmore, the AI machine learning was developed in Bristol by 20 mathematicians and actuaries with input from Cambridge Analytica. Those are from your insurance.
I think the words of Alexander Lipnick, he probably
slight exaggeration.
Spun it. You know?
So I know how the insurance company operates, but if my numbers are incorrect, there might have been 15. But they do have people that look at this stuff. You have to as an insurance. But they were not connected with the insurance business at the referendum whatsoever.
Where did you get them from?
Well, they work for the insurance business. But they
no, hold on. Sorry.
Hang on. They weren't. Hang on, fellas. Hang on.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, sorry.
Yeah.
Either they
fellas is all right.
either they were working for the insurance business, or they weren't connected to the insurance company. But you can't have both.
I'm just saying that there was not people on artificial intelligence and big data analytics working on the referendum. It was conflated in the same way that Dan Hannon said that they had astrophysicists working on the west coast of California.
So were these actuaries employed by the insurance business?
They didn't work on the referendum. That's what I don't know how else I can plainly put it.
So what Mr. Wigmore said here, we were developed in Bristol by 20 mathematicians and actuaries, isn't actually correct? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rebecca Powell.
Thank you very much. Apologies, Chairman, for coming in late, and gentlemen, thank you for coming to the committee. I wanted to just look at some of your myriad businesses, Mr. Banks. So, for anyone on the outside, this would be, this is a complicated arrangement of business, and you have indeed, I believe, many names as well. I wonder if you might just start off by explaining your role with ICS Risk Solutions.
It's a holding company that owns an insurance business.
So is it the heart of your finances?
I think, by the way,
you've got many different
I have to say, first of all, I've got international businesses.
Yeah.
I do have quite a complex business structure. And I know that's difficult for some MPs to perhaps grasp the complexity of a financial group of companies and how it interacts. But the facts of the matter are, it's quite a big insurance business. It employs over 1,000 people.
You're talking about Go Skippy?
No, hold on.
Carry on. Yeah.
If you went into the accounts of Aviva or any insurance company in this country, you could equally say this is a complex web of subsidiaries and different companies. It's an insurance business, and by definition, insurance businesses have lots of connected companies.
So just to be clear
Yeah.
then, for us MPs who don't understand, the complexities of 20 businesses, could you just clearly outline? I did run my own business, but it was very small.
What sort of business was it?
ICS Communications and PR.
Mm-hmm. Oh, of course it was. Did you work with Mr. Collins?
ICS Risk Solutions. Can you just explain where that comes in, though? Is it the holding company for Eldon Insurance and the insurer behind Go Skippy, just so that we've got that all clear?
Off the top of my head, we've got a number of ICSs. There's more than one ICS. You'd have to be very specific, and I'd have to go back and check. I mean, even to the point where if you said to me, do you know every single company and how it interacts with every single company, it's probably unlikely I can tell you that. But ICS, if it's the right ICS, is the ultimate holding company of Eldon Insurance, which is the Go Skippy, is one of the brands that operates under Eldon Insurance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is it true that ICS Risk Solutions paid over 77 million since 2015 to prop up another of your companies called Southern Rock, which is an underwriting arm in Gibraltar?
So you're saying...
Well, I'm just asking you.
Well, I just want to clarify...
Just to be clear.
Well, I just want to be clear. So you're saying a company I own called ICS is propping up another company I own.
This is what we're led to believe. I'm just
but I own
asking you
both
if this
companies.
is true. So yes, but I believe that Southern Rock was insolvent. So you've been propping
Well, that's
it
not
up
correct.
with 77 million.
How'd you work that one out? If it was insolvent, it wouldn't be allowed to trade, would it?
This is a good question. That's what I'm asking. But this
Well,
is what we're led to believe.
Well, it's a ridiculous question. I mean, actually, if an insurance company is insolvent, it loses its licence, it can't trade. Instantly. So what you're really saying is that ICS Holdings, which I own, lent some money to another company I own.
I mean, I'm led to believe
saying?
that it was after regulators found that that business was trading while technically insolvent.
Well, the regulators we put in place with the regulators what's called a restoration plan. It's quite normal insurance. I mean, Aviva and Direct Line in the same year announced £1 billion losses in the UK motor market. We were we were required to put more capital into the insurance business, along with the entire UK insurance industry, by the way, had to all put money into their insurance companies, and that money came from another company I owned. So I'm struggling to see what the killer question is here.
Oh, well, it's not supposed to be a killer question.
Well, it is,
I'm just trying to get some clarity, but also then the company's house have asked you to publish the accounts of ICS Risk Solutions, have they not, in order to get some clarity on all of these things?
No, they haven't asked us to.
Oh.
I've not, I mean, if you're giving me new information that I haven't hitherto received, I don't know, but we have not been asked to do that.
Okay. And then...
By the way, we file all of our accounts with all of the different company, registrations. Of course we do. We're a licensed insurance company.
Fine. Thank you.
Can I just return to the point of the sort of, 77 million into Southern Rock? It was money that went from one company I own to another company I own. So if you look at someone like Aviva, you look at someone like Direct Line, they would have had a subsidiary that trades, and because of widespread losses in the UK motor market, virtually every UK insurance company had to put more capital into their insurance companies. So I'm struggling.
Just for the reasons, so the answer to the question seems to be there was a payment from the balance sheet of one company to the other. Yeah. And for that amount of money, is that
correct?
Yeah.
No, I think you obviously suggest where did the £77 million come from. So I'll answer that for you before you get to the question, if that is the question. Yeah.
Well, you tell me. I'm assuming it came from ICS Risk
Or from
Solutions,
Russia.
but maybe it came from somewhere else. We'll get to that in a minute.
Siberian gold mines.
We haven't got to Russia
No.
yet.
So effectively, the deal that was done. In fact, when you mentioned it went from one balance sheet to another. In fact, the deal was that the insurance broker at the end of that transaction, Eldon, actually sold some of its forward income on the sale of policies back to the insurance company. So there wasn't £77 million of cash that just went bosh into a bucket. It was a structured deal over 4 years where the income was paid in, month by month in accordance with the deal we did with the regulator. So there was no lump sum payment of £77 million going in.
Okay. Can we just move on to a company called Rock Services Limited?
Yeah.
Can you just explain what that involvement is and where that comes from?
Rock Services is a UK... sorry. Rock Services is a UK company which provides a treasury facility around the group.
It does what? It provides a
Treasury service to various different
funding
things.
to people.
This is where a lot of misunderstanding has come in. For instance, The Guardian gloriously wrote an article saying that we had a turnover of 21 million and administrative expenses of 19.8 million. Well, actually, that was the payroll. So it actually settles group-wide all of the salaries every month. It pays reinsurers, it pays a whole host of suppliers. It's a kind of service company that does sort of settles bills, if you like.
Okay, and did it settle bills or give money or loans to Better for the Country Limited, which I believe is another of your companies?
Yeah, this is disclosed in the Electoral Commission filing. So, when Better for the Country, we lent money across to it, the Rock Services I lent the money to the company, but the money was delivered by Rock Services.
So, but Rock Services weren't identified as a loan provider on Leave EU's return to the Electoral Commission because you chose to do it through Better for the Country.
I think you may have missed the Chairman's opening comments, because we obviously don't approve of the Electoral Commission interpretation of all of this, and at 9 o'clock today we filed an appeal in the courts against all of the findings of the Electoral Commission. So we're straying into territory that's...
Bracky one here at the very beginning, because of the appeal that's been lodged, those matters really are considered sub judice, so we're not going to pursue questions on that area.
Okay. So, and can you just explain to me why am I allowed to ask this then? Because of the court, why did you transfer money from Rock Services to Better for the Country, or we're not able to go into those?
Because I will cover it, although it's been obviously our appeal against the Electoral Commission findings have been lodged today. Effectively, the loan agreement between Better for the Country was between Better for the Country and myself. Okay, Rock Services, as we just discussed, is a treasury function that just delivers, the cash. It's just a service company, and the actual loan came from another one of my companies that was delivered in. So, from my perspective, I'm a UK taxpayer. I've made the loan out of my own funds or company funds to Better for the Country, and that is what was disclosed to the Electoral Commission. Now, they say in their actual finding that the loan wasn't wholly untransparent. Well, actually, if you take the opposite of what is not wholly untransparent, it means, well, it was transparent. So they say that I should have said that the money came from Rock Services, whereas it said it came from me. Now, I'm sorry, but usually the other way around is people trying to hide behind companies, not, say who it is. This is where the money came from. Can I just say, I think because of the legal action that's now and this is part of the legal action with the Electoral Commission, all of the documents are available, or should be, shortly, in our submission to the court, where we're basically challenging the fairness of that hearing. or those findings.
No, I think we'll probably leave it there on
Yeah.
that sort of it for now. So,
Okay.
were there any other questions you had?
Well, it was just a general observation that all these different companies and names and tortuously complicated arrangements that people now seem to be trying to unravel, journalists or whoever, suggest that you do have something to hide in all of this that might somehow have some connection to influencing politics across the world.
Well, I'd like to think I'm an evil genius with a white cat that kind of controls the whole of Western democracy, but clearly that's nonsense. And by the way, you keep mentioning different names. This is another Guardian wonderful piece of fake news where they've been through every filing that's been made to Company House. And Company House, by the way, frequently make mistakes, so I know to my cost. And so what the Guardian said was, there are 7 different versions of Aaron Banks, at Company's House. And the most common misspelling is 2 A's, Aaron and Aaron. And so when you say different names, it's my name. It's not like John Smith or Roger or Brendan O'Hara. It's literally my name on the documentation. So I can't see where this comes from. It just says Aaron Banks, or in one case it uses my middle name. It says Aaron Fraser Banks, or it uses Aaron Fraser Andrew Banks. And each one is counted as a separate version of my name. Now you just brought it up because that is exactly how fake news works. You make a comment, you say, you use 7 different versions at Company's House. Well, actually, it was just different versions of my name or my middle name. And by doing that, the Guardian write a story, he doesn't file his paperwork correctly, he does this, and then they write the story, then the fake news gathers pace. And you've actually repeated that, I think, 2 or 3 times. It's a complete non-story.
Well, this is why you're here today, so that you can give your side.
Well, I jolly well am.
And just finally, so can you be quite clear that any money from your overseas business interests has never formed part of your political donations?
No.
You can't be clear.
I can be clear. I live in South Gloucestershire. I pay my taxes in South Gloucestershire, and I pay a shed load of tax, probably more than the entire committee put together. Okay, I'm not going to be lectured about my business interests, and I structure everything legally. If you don't like the tax law pertaining to this country, get out there and change it. I would support that in many ways. I mean, you can change the tax for Google, change it for Starbucks, change it for all these different structures. But don't lecture me about offshore tax structures and complexities. You set the law. You make the law.
And are you quite clear about what sources of finance are permitted in order to donate to political parties or campaigns?
I'm crystal clear.
So we won't find anything untoward.
No. And I'm frankly sick and tired of this. I mean, the reason I went into the referendum was because I have a different version of what the future of this country is. I respect your right to disagree with that. I know that you're all Remainers, I think. All Remainers? Hands up? Yeah, I think so. You've got a vested interest in trying to discredit the Brexit campaign. I mean, I look at the fact that you haven't called any witnesses from the Remain campaign to hammer them. I mean, I sit here, we've got George Osborne, who's editor of the Daily, the Evening Standard. If you didn't have lunch with or go to the hospitality of Putin's first man in Russia, he's certainly working for Putin's second man. This is the guy that ran the campaign. So I'm just.
Yeah, but I think just so with this inquiry, what we've been looking at is the role, the role of data targeting.
Yeah.
And if we had, and people made allegations about Leave.eu and Vote Leave as a consequence of the work we're doing at Cambridge Analytica.
I don't want to be rude.
And that's why now if similar allegations have been made about Britain Strong in Europe or Conservatives in, then we would be equally asking them the same questions.
But the guy leading the Remain campaign is working for a Putin oligarch in London. If you can't see that there's some double standards being applied here, I don't know.
Ian Lucas.
Mr. Banks, before July 2011, was Southern Rock investigated by the Gibraltar Financial Services?
I'm now not going to answer any more questions on the insurance business. I've covered it with, is it Rebecca? if you want to, you can read what you like from that, but I've given the explanation to a pretty full, list of questions.
I just want to know, is that the case? Why don't
I've
you
given
answer
you
the
an
question?
answer.
You're not giving me an answer. You're avoiding.
I've
answering.
answered.
You're not answering a straight question.
I answered the questions of my financial affairs. I'm not going to answer any more questions.
So are you going to answer any questions about your financial affairs?
I just have, in full.
I'm asking you another question about your financial affairs.
Well, you can ask away. I'm not going to answer any more questions.
I just want to be clear.
What relevance has this got to do with fake news?
I'm speaking to Mr. Banks.
I don't care, I'm speaking as well. What relevance has this got to do with the referendum and fake news?
Well, perhaps if you...
What relevance has it got to do with it?
Order. Sorry, we just bring the session to order. I don't propose that we keep going over ground that's already been answered. I think this specific point that Mr. Lucas has raised wasn't covered before. I'm grateful if you could answer that, even if it's just yes or no, and then we can move on.
I said I'm not going to answer. And I've
Okay,
said I've answered all
I'm going to ask the
questions.
question. I'm going to ask the question.
But I say
I'm going to ask the next question.
Well, hold on a second.
Okay. I'm going to ask the next question.
What
and the next
has this
question
got
is,
to do with the
the
referendum
Gibraltar
fake
Financial
news?
Services Committee discovered that the company had been trading while technically insolvent for 3 years. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, that's just not correct.
It's not correct.
No, that's not how insurance companies work.
So you deny that the Gibraltar Financial Services Committee found that the company had been trading insolvent for 3 years.
It had not been trading insolvently for 3 years. If it had been, the regulator wouldn't have allowed it to. This is what happens. You've got parliamentary privilege. You can make a full statement. And this is exactly how things start. How on earth can an insurance company trade insolvently for 3 years?
I think this question of the solvency of the business and the transfer of cash to the business has been covered now.
But I'm sorry,
unless there's more you want to say about it.
Damien, I'm sorry, but this committee is meant to be investigating fake news and the role of it in politics. What Mr. Lucas is doing is using parliamentary privilege to make a reckless allegation, which he knows is going to be reported elsewhere, and that's why he's doing it. And frankly, it's pretty disgraceful.
Mr. Banks, all I'm doing is asking you a question.
No, you're not.
Okay, but I think the question's now been asked. Okay. You have answered it, and I think we should now move on to the other issues we want to cover.
Is it correct that you do not currently have FCA approval to carry out an operational executive role at Eldon Insurance Service?
What is this? Have you just got another list of questions?
Is that correct?
Are you the MP that got drunk in the House of Commons and harassed a woman and got drunk on a karaoke evening?
No.
Well, good. But one of the committee is. I just don't know which one. What do you want me to do? Do we want to sit here and throw bread rolls at each?
Mr. Banks, I think this is a serious issue.
Why?
No, why?
That's why are you asking a question which is clear as day. You go and check with the FCA. They'll tell you.
What has this got to do?
Well, why doesn't he answer the question?
Well, I'm asking you, what has this got to do with fake news and its role?
Because it's about money.
Interference?
It's about money, and it's about where the funding came from for an individual who made substantial donations to a hugely important referendum campaign in the UK.
Yeah.
That's why it's relevant.
Yeah. Well, for a start, an insurance company cannot be technically insolvent for 3 years.
Well, I mean, you keep saying that.
Well, okay. Since you have...
So I'm referring... That's why I'm referring... That's why I asked you the question.
So I answered the reason I'm slightly vexated about it because I answered the question to Miss Becker. In that the entire UK motor insurance industry suffered, I think it was a £2.5 billion loss at that time. So what happens in insurance companies is not that they're insolvent, it's that what's called the loss ratio that sits at the heart of the business, that is the number of claims you pay versus the premium you take in, gets reassessed. And when it's reassessed, then they will say, well, there was let's say, a shortfall of X, and therefore you need to inject more money into that company to continue trading. And what we did through the transaction that you brought up was inject more money into the insurance company for it to continue to trade normally as it should have done. Now, do you really think the regulator is going to allow a company that's been insolvent to continue on trading? I think if you thought about your question, you might go back to the question of do MPs understand the complexity of businesses? But actually, the fact of the matter is, when we identified what had to be injected in, we injected it in, along with, I might add, most of the UK insurance industry. And I'll tell you, by the way, why it happened. It happened because of personal injury claims that were coming out of the woodwork because of accident management companies, and essentially what you had is you had a whole scandal around lawyers making cash for crash claims, and then basically ringing people in industrial numbers and generating personal injury claims that then subsequently had to be recognised by the insurance company. And when that occurred, we did the right thing, we injected the money in from our holding company, and we carried on. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I'd still like you to tell me whether you have FCA approval to carry out an operational executive role at Eldon Insurance Services.
I don't have an operational role within it.
So you don't have authority?
I don't have an operational role within my insurance business. I own it.
Thank you for
We have a chief executive.
Thank you for answering my question.
Oh, is that what you do? You ask the question, do you have FCA approval? And then when I try and answer the question, you say no, because that's the little sound bite you want.
No, answer the question fully. If there's more you want to add, then you're more than welcome to.
The only reason you've asked these questions is to try to create some sort of shadiness around the whole thing.
Mr. Banks, all I'm trying to do is follow the facts.
What facts?
The fact that I've just...
What has this got to do with the referendum?
It's got a lot to do with the referendum.
Why?
Because
UK
you are
taxpayer.
the biggest financial donor in British political history.
Yeah.
That's what it's to do with the referendum.
That's why
you're here.
Yeah, and that's what you really hate.
No, it's not what I hate. It's not what I hate. I just want people to be open. I want people to be open. And I want you to tell us the truth.
I answered the question, and then
What
you
do you think
went
was
ahead and
yeah.
asked it again second.
What do you think first attracted the Russian embassy to Aaron Banks, the biggest political donor in political history? Do you think there was anything to do with the fact that you were involved in the referendum campaign?
We started on Russia now. We've finished the,
I think if we could actually get into a routine where the question's asked and the witnesses answer it, rather than just providing a commentary on the question.
I did ask a question, and he hasn't answered it.
Why do we think the Kremlin were interested in us?
I asked why the Russian embassy were interested in you.
I can tell you why they were, because I asked to meet them. We met them at a UKIP conference, and we thought it would be. I was a diplomat, and we thought it would be quite a nice thing to go and chat to them. Why? Because his wife is also Russian. She's never engaged in much the Russian diaspora, and we thought it would be nice to have a chat with him. I've met him and his people in the diplomatic community many times. You do. That's what you do. So it wasn't unusual when you meet somebody who said, well, we'd like to come and have a chat with the ambassador. It'd be nice to see him. There was no other reason. In fact, we instigated, not the other way round.
Ian, if the French ambassador phoned you up this afternoon, possibly it may happen. And said,
he never has. I'm not as important as you.
No, but frankly, if he did, and said, would you like to come round for lunch on Thursday? Of course you can.
Yeah, but he never has.
And by the way,
the Russian ambassador wanted to.
But Ian, this is with hindsight. Before
it's not with hindsight, it's a fact.
Yeah,
it's a fact.
So why do you think he wanted to meet you?
What I'm saying is that we've now got a full-scale Russian witch hunt going on. Before that all occurred, there was no issue.
Can I tell you why we wanted to see him? I'm a diplomat for a small country called Belize. We had a couple of issues in relation to bananas and sugars. No, from bananas and sugars. And the initial conversation I had with this gentleman at the UKIP conference was I was trying to find investors to look at perhaps buying a banana farm which had got into trouble because there was a King Ting designate person that owned it, and as a consequence Belize couldn't sell its bananas to the places like the United States or the United Kingdom. It needed someone to buy them. And so one of the conversations we had was about that. So it was a myriad of things that we wanted to talk to. It wasn't anything to do with politics.
I don't want to interrupt that. Ian is correct.
So, Mr. Wigmore, can I ask you a question? You mentioned about Belize.
Yeah.
Have you ever taken any visitors into British military bases in Belize?
No.
Never?
No.
Thank you.
Well, can I tell you why that is? Because BATSUB, which is the British Army Training Support Unit, only came back a few years ago It was out of the jurisdiction for about 10 years. And if it wasn't for the wonderful ambassador there, a guy called Peter Hughes, and the ambassador previously, who lobbied Parliament to bring in ambassadors, the training support unit, back into Belize, I've never been to the training centre in Belize, where the British Army are now, never.
I think it's important to remember as well, Andy was the Trade Ministry Minister for Belize in London.
My job was to go and sell the country and try and get foreign direct investment into my tiny country.
But I do think Ian's correct in the sense that if we hadn't been involved in Brexit, we wouldn't have obviously been invited for lunch.
Perhaps.
Do you want me to go to the Cambridge Analytica in UKIP?
Yes, I do. Just one question I wanted to ask on that. I think it's been shown that Nigel Farage met with the Russian ambassador in May 2013.
In the European Parliament?
I just wanted to ask whether either of you were present at that meeting.
He only ever meets ambassadors in the European Parliament. He's very sensitive and careful about things like that.
That's fine.
He would never meet them socially.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Can you describe the work that Cambridge Analytica did for UKIP?
Mm-hmm. I did earlier. I'm not going to answer questions a second time.
No, but UKIP, you didn't really know anything.
I mean, the bottom line is UKIP data was sent to Cambridge Analytica. I think we sparred over the invoice. I've given the answer.
So it was some kind of assessment, did you say? Or?
Well, they took the data and they wanted to do a sort of pilot on that. And then, as I said, the pilot ended up in an invoice of, I think, whatever the number was,
£41,500.
UKIP decided that the work wasn't worth a single penny, or there wasn't really any work, and they didn't pay it.
Did you make a donation to UKIP of £42,000?
And then they didn't use it on, which was a source of some irritation for myself. They didn't use it to actually settle the invoice, they just kept it.
So, the purpose of the donation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you gave the invoice specifically to UKIP to pay the bill from Cambridge Analytica, but they didn't do that?
Correct.
Was that your decision or was it their decision?
That was UKIP's decision. I think they were short of funds and decided it was better to be used elsewhere.
So you don't know why UKIP didn't pay the bill?
I just don't think they wanted to. They said the work wasn't of any use.
When did you first hear about aggregate IQ?
I think we covered this earlier on. I'm not really familiar with aggregate IQ.
You're not familiar with them?
No.
Were you aware of them when you were discussing matters with Cambridge Analytica when you were talking about?
No, I think the first time I heard it was in actually watching one of your committees.
So
we're not familiar with that AIQ. We thought we were dealing with Cambridge Analytica. I didn't have any.
Because what's interesting with AIQ is that they not only had a relationship with Cambridge Analytica, but they subsequently came to have a relationship with Vote Leave and concerning data.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that Cambridge Analytica and Leave EU, which was connected, as we know, to AIQ, both had a relationship with Vote Leave.
Well, I think you're going to have to drag Dominic Cummings and Chambers to ask that question. I mean, we didn't deal with AIQ.
Yeah.
But
so you don't know why AIQ is so special?
Well, I don't think it is. I think it's an ad agent. I think Vote Leave used, from what I gather, used it to place Facebook adverts and.
Yeah, it seems to be to do with data and their ability. Well, that's what we're trying to find out, which is why I'm asking you about it. And I appreciate that you may not know, and that's kind of the gist of what you're saying. Can I just ask you a question also about when you mentioned, I think it was Mr. Wigmore said earlier that you said you wanted to bring the skills of the insurance industry to the campaign.
My skills. I'm a good marketeer.
So in terms of marketing, I mean, how did you do that? Did you? And you made clear earlier that you didn't use the same employees.
No.
Did you use different people to do the same type of work, or can you just explain that?
The question that when you've got two parts of the referendum. You've got the kind of short period, and then you've got the kind of the run up to the whole when the spending limits were kind of they don't kick in, you've got to notify it, but it's open season effectively. That's the right description. So within our office, we had an office set up that was for Leave.eu. It was a call centre, and we were getting a tremendous number of phone calls from obviously the website, from Twitter, from Facebook, and from the whole thing. And as part of that, what we had was a creative department that basically created Facebook tiles and Twitter. And one of the reasons we were so successful, as you'll appreciate in politics, we were able to create some of the stuff that was in real time and was topical quicker than anybody else. So effectively what we would do is take something that was being talked about and turn it into, relevant material. And I think that's much more relevant to how you get traction on social media. We had one video that had 14 million views. If I look through the campaign sort of, statistics, we got more traction than Labour, Conservative, Liberal social media put together. So you look at our top 10 videos, the top one was, over 10 million, and then there were a whole sequence of videos that got even bigger traction. This kind of idea that behind it lies, I can understand why you can't get to the truth. It is quite confusing. You've got this idea in your head that data is driving some magical profiling. It's like, look into my eyes, you're drawn in. And actually, the truth of it is, that's just not the truth.
So, Mr. Banks, I've been elected 5 times to my position. I've seen, since 2001, I've seen the political world transformed by the advent of social media. And in particular, in 2015 and 2017, the social media had a massive impact on both general elections at the time. So I'm not kind of, and I was a skeptic.
Yeah.
In 2015, I didn't use social media very much, and as a result, it had a negative impact on me. So I used it in 2017. Yeah. I think it's important, and I think it's very valuable. And why I'm asking you about it is because you said right at the outset that you were using social media in the EU, which is entirely legitimate and entirely appropriate. Mm-hmm. But what I want to know is, in what way we're using it. You've explained that partially. Yeah. And there are 2 things really. There's the creative aspect, in other words, the content that you use, which you've touched on, but there's also the data, who to reach, which is also extremely important.
But this is, I think, where
there's a simplicity to this. I'll just give you a bit of colour. I sat on a select committee and gave evidence to the Transport Select Committee about how claims management companies marketed and abused data. I was involved in the Compensation Act 2006, was trying to control and regulate claims management businesses. What they were brilliant at was how they used the internet, Google ads, click ads, all the rest of it, and to market their products. So when you take knowledge like that, it's not difficult to understand what, if in our instance, what we needed to do to try and create ads and all the rest of it. So the knowledge of marketing and the knowledge of social media is quite mature.
So did you use staff who previously worked in the insurance business in the EU? So where did these people come from?
We created a team of people as you would do in a business. We just put people together.
So they have the skills already?
Well, no, I think if you take, how does social media get traction? That's what you've got to really consider. You're sort of saying, how did the message get out to all these people? It must have been data. But my experience of the social media is it's a firestorm that just, like a brush fire, it blows over the thing. Now our skill was creating bushfires and then putting a big fan on and making the fan blow. And so actually we were prepared to, and if you could criticise us for anything, and I'm sure you would, we picked subjects and topics that we knew would fly. So when we first started when we sat back and said, well, we're going to create this campaign, how do we make it fly? And actually what was absolutely clear was you had to figure out what the pressure points were that made things fly. And that's what we did.
Unfortunately, and I know you may bring this up, when you take a look at what President Trump did, he was in a similar situation. No one paid any attention to him. He knew he was going to have a huge battle against the mainstream media. How was he going to get attention? And so the more outrageous he was, the more attention he got. The more attention he got, the more outrageous he was. That's how he operated, and there was a similarity in that. I don't absolutely apologise for it, because that was the only way we were going to try and infiltrate the mainstream media and the political parties, to try and be all of those things.
There's been a lot talked about it, but the truth is that right at the very beginning, and we did some polls on what were the big issues, it all came back to one thing. It was open door mass immigration, then it was the health service, then quality it was education, quality of life, proper, could you get on the it was basically this kind of discontent around these sorts of issues. So we took a decision at the beginning of the campaign that we were still talking about the economy in the last week of the campaign, the Remain group would win, and we had to keep on topic, if you like. And so that is why in the end 2 campaigns were quite effective, because you had Boris and Gove talking to people about sovereignty, which was all very important to us as well, but the immigration issue was the one that kind of set the wildfires burning.
And why we fell out is because the Vote Leave team did not want to go down that road. They wanted to airbrush Farage out and the immigration bits out, because they thought he would turn people off. We thought differently, because our polling said this was an emotive issue that people wanted to hear about.
I can actually say as well, if you look at why did we actually get into business in the first place, it was because Nigel and UKIP were terrified, well not terrified, but they were worried that Vote Leave, they were waiting for David Cameron to come back and do the renegotiation. It was yes Prime Minister, no Prime Minister, and that if the campaign didn't start much earlier, we would be in an awful lot of trouble. So what we were given the job of was effectively, pushing Vote Leave to get their campaign started. They hate us for it because we terrorise them. At Elliot and Cummings and all those people. And so in the end, you ended up with 2 campaigns, one that was pushing the other, as hard as it damn well could. And so the truth of it is that immigration was our kind of thing that we were going to stick to. And despite a lot of abuse, a lot of people said that our message or campaign was chaotic and disorganised. We ruthlessly stuck to message.
Did you believe what you were saying on immigration?
Of course. And if you go back to why have we had Trump, why have we had Brexit, I think you've had open door mass immigration, which has undoubtedly affected communities. My belief is there should have been moderated, normal immigration at the long run range of 50 to 75,000 a year. But it's not totally political that successive Labour governments and Conservatives just didn't care. And Labour didn't care because it was voters for them, and the Tories didn't care because it was cheap labour for them. So in the end, both political parties came to complete consensus on immigration. And the fact is, Brexit occurred, and a lot of people didn't see it coming because they didn't sense the anger that was underneath. We, I think, understood the anger. Did we at sometimes go a little bit over the top? Probably. But actually remember, we were given the job of keeping, Nigel and UKIP, in the game, because Vote Leave were going to try and Toryize the entire thing, and it came back to the political, dynamic that's been playing out for the last, 15 years with UKIP and the Tories, and then Labour came into it latterly because actually more Labour voters started to swing towards UKIP over immigration. So to think it was a chaotic campaign would be wrong. It was ruthlessly executed in a business-like way, and we stayed on message.
Thank you. Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Banks, I just wanted to go back to the insurance data, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've been very categoric that no insurance data from either Eldon or Go Skippy was used by Leave.eu during either the pre-regulated spending period or during the regulated spending period. That's correct? Yeah. How about data from leads from insurance comparison websites that were received?
Absolutely not. And in fact, we've been through this in that our insurance businesses are separately run. And they have separate compliances around them and separate boards of directors. So this idea that you could just sort of, toss it around, there's a whole set of team of people work just on compliance. You categorically denied it.
Okay.
And by the way, no one has produced one shred of evidence to say that this happened. And this is part of my issue with the committee, that questions get raised and then it turns into some sort of fact. And in fact, if we go to that very question, there was a big article by Carol Cadwallader. I'll sort of...
Hi, Carol.
Oh, Mr. Carol.
Perhaps we could go back to my questions.
No, but no.
So,
I'm just answering
so you,
the question.
yeah, you have answered the
So
question.
I haven't answered the
So-
question. There was a big article by Carol that basically accused us of using price comparison website information. And what Carol did was actually say, oh, we hold your data. Or sorry, her data is on, got it, because she did an information request. We quote on 35 million people a year. So in other words, if Mr. Collins, you submitted your details to any comparison website, we would have quoted on you. We would have quoted on you, everybody. So the fact is, she wrote a completely fallacious argument, saying that, oh, money's supermarket. But actually, but it was completely untrue. She was saying, well, there it is. You've got my data, so therefore you must have used her.
Okay, so I just want to read out to you evidence that we heard in committee from Brittany Kaiser. I just want your response to it.
Yeah.
She says, and I quote, I visited the Eldon Insurance and Leave.U headquarters, which was in the same building with the same staff. Yeah. When a senior data scientist and myself spent time with their phone bank, I was told by the people using the phone bank that the individuals they were calling were from the insurance database.
A flat lie.
Okay.
But then again, I would refer you back to my initial comments that Brittany Kaiser also said to the committee that we had sent data to Mississippi, which I think we're going to try and get on to later. And that's not true either. And in fact, we had only ever met anyone from Mississippi after the referendum.
Okay, thank you. So I've asked you questions about data going from
you're saying
insurance to leave.eu. Can I ask you questions about any data going in the opposite direction? So was any data gathered by leave.eu or UKIP and shared with your insurance companies?
I don't believe so, no.
You don't believe so? Have you ever checked?
I can't be categorical about everything, but I've never seen any evidence of that, no.
You're very surprised.
Yeah.
Sorry?
There are two separate data controllers for these businesses.
Right. Okay,
in the
thank you.
article. Can I just, I wanted to return to Brittany Kaiser for a second, because she's been quoted from the committee with the Mississippi data. We know our first contact with Mississippi was after the referendum. The University of Mississippi, where it was meant to have been sent, has flatly denied the allegation as well. And I go back to what she said, subsequently about, having visited Julian Assange and handed over cryptocurrency. She gave a testimony which wasn't wholly truthful.
Mr. Wigmore, you told Dr. Emma Bryant in evidence that the committee has published that the insurance company's actuaries used data to determine which 12 regions Nigel Farage needed to visit. Was the work of those actuaries, from what you've described, accounted for in the spending return?
I was wrong. That was I apologise because that was completely misinterpreted and that was incorrect. What we did...
Wrong or misinterpreted?
Both, actually. Both. It was wrong. What we did, how you find places and clusters to market to, the actuaries didn't sit down and do it for us. It's that knowledge. We took that knowledge and then applied that. We didn't actually have someone physically sitting down and doing that for us, particularly on the referendum. We knew how to target marketing-wise, and we just borrowed the same principles they would have used for marketing insurance to market for the referendum. So that's what it was.
Originally, Jerry Gunster, his original strategy was to do what he called targeted marketing of, I think he used the word marketing, of which areas would be most effective. And that's why Farage was sent out to various places where he would have most impact.
Okay. Can you see why there is a question mark over work that was done before the regulated spending period using information or, for example, the work that Cambridge Analytica did during the regulated spending period, because you'd seen that work, you could use it, why there are concerns about that?
I think it's a fair question, but that is part of that. I'm not wishing to sidestep it, but one of the sections in the appeal to the Electoral Commission today is in fact about Jerry Gunster and that issue.
Okay. Can I go back to Eldon and Go Skippy? I think, Mr Wigmore, you have said in interviews that the large donation that you made, Mr Banks, the source of that income was the sale of New Law, a law firm that you were involved in.
I wasn't involved in New Law.
Ms
Banks, what would I know about where he came from? It was a suggestion. I said, well, he did sell a law firm. It was kind of one of those random. So they were questioning whether or not he had the money. Well,
I think one of the things I would say on that is that there's been a number of reports, I think, by Open Democracy. You're questioning the source of my wealth. I think that's where that.
I mean, it's a lot of money that you gave to the referendum.
Well, I felt
I'm just interested. Where it came from.
I felt very strongly about it. I think that's probably clear. No, but New Law was a personal injury law firm that I set up. It was sold various shareholders to Help Hire for I think £36 million. Okay. So I think in relation to the questions we've been bombarded with, there are random answers.
I'm just interested. So I think it was April 18, Mr Wigmore, you said that the sale of New Law legal was how money was generated for the referendum. Now,
it would have been an idea. You talk about Aaron Banks' wealth. I don't know his true wealth, but if you were asking me, does he have any money? Okay. That would have been one of my responses.
So
well,
we've got
just
a misrepresentation, we've got something wrong, and we've got an idea. Fine, okay. At the time of the sale, Mr Banks, you weren't a shareholder or a director, were you?
So it's not a misrepresentation. I was the founder of New Law, and it was
I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about Mr Wigmore's previous answer to me. So, at the time of the sale, Mr Banks, you weren't a shareholder or a director, were you, in New Law Legal?
I'd sold some of the shares I owned before the big sale.
Okay. So, can I ask through what vehicle you were paid then?
In the UK, and I paid my tax on it.
But which vehicle? Which
myself.
Company? No, which company was it paid to you through?
It was paid to myself.
Directly?
Yeah, I was a shareholder of New Law, and I received a cheque for it.
But you weren't at the time of sale? You weren't at the time of sale?
No. There was a sale of the company ultimately to a company called Help Hire. By that stage, I wasn't a shareholder in the business. Right. And I had sold my shares prior to that, so I was one of the founding shareholders of the business, along with John Gannon, Helen Molyneux, and another person. We were all business partners in it, and I had sold my shares in it.
Okay. Why did you sell up?
Why shouldn't I?
And I'm just interested, that's all. Reason why. Okay. Can I go on to the official Labour Leave campaign? Did you have any relationship with them?
Yeah.
What was the nature of that relationship?
I think, that one's a little...
Well, we didn't have an official. What happened, they fell out with Vote Leave, and they were going to come over to join the Grassroots Out movement. So Kate Hoey jumped ship. Brendan, what's his surname? Brendan Chilton, yeah, he jumped ship. John Mills did and he didn't. So they still had Giselle Stewart, I think, and a couple of others. So Vote Leave kind of still owned the Labour Leave issue, but the individuals, because these individuals actually wanted to work with, they recognised what impact Nigel might have in the Labour heartlands and areas. They were quite happy to work with Nigel and the Grassroots Out movement and anything else that we were doing. So that was the relationship. Officially, they were very much Vote Leave's gang. Okay.
Did Rock Services loan any staff to the campaign?
Not Rock Services, but I think Leave.eu in London. What happened was, I think it was John Mills was chairman of Grassroots. He was chairman of
Labour Leave.
He was the chairman of Vote Leave, and effectively Kate Hoey fell out with Vote Leave, and then the Labour people working within what Vote Leave offices, which was essentially a pretty Tory sort of operation, didn't get on particularly well with them, and we gave them an office in opposite us in Millbank.
Okay, and I've just got a couple of questions on Eldon again. How successful was Eldon Insurance as an insurance company?
Is successful.
Is successful.
Yeah, we've got about 500,000 customers, 1,000 staff. We employ 300 in Bristol, 400 in Durban in South Africa, and 300 in Newcastle.
Right. I was just interested because in 2015, for example, it achieved a profit of less than £300,000 on a turnover of over 33 million.
That's right.
Yeah. And did you attempt a £250 fundraising for Eldon in 2016?
250?
Sorry, 250 million fundraising for Eldon.
We go back to the original question from Rebecca, that Eldon Insurance Services sold certain of its revenue streams back to Southern Rock in the deal that was 77 million over 5 years. So by definition, if you sell some of the revenue sources, the money had gone back onto the balance sheet of Southern Rock.
So why do that if Eldon is successful? What's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, because its earning capability was putting the 77 million pounds back into Southern Rock. And that's how you go back in a full circle.
Okay. Because I looked at some consumer review and comparison websites about the insurance company and the products, both for Go Eldon, but particularly for Go Skippy. And you've got one of the worst rankings in the country, haven't you, on Go Skippy?
I don't believe that's correct.
It is on the ones I looked at.
I don't know which ones you've looked at. Fine. Probably the most detrimental one.
Right. And my last,
one thing I would say on that is that if you take a wander through these, the companies that rate customer satisfaction for insurance company, it's a grudge purchase. And so you look at anybody's feedback, it's not usually very favourable.
Going back to your earlier evidence about, you said earlier you made the donation of £42,000 to UKIP so that they could pay the invoice, because you were getting badgered about the invoice, I think, weren't you? Did you declare that £42,000?
Yes.
You did, in your spending return?
Correct. No, well, I declared it to UKIP as a donation.
As a donation, but it wasn't declared in the spending return?
There was no spending return, it was before the short period, I think. But I think what happened was we gave it to UKIP, so it was a donation to UKIP. We didn't receive the work.
Yes, I see. So it goes back to my point I was making earlier, which is about work that's done pre-regulated spending period, but using what has been learned from that during the regulated spending period. But I appreciate you said you don't want to answer that question because of the appeal.
Well, the God I've Done thing is under appeal.
Fine. Okay. Thank you.
I just wanted to pick up on one of your answers to Joe's questions, just on the this issue of the areas that were selected for Nigel Farage to campaign in, and that you, I think, all right, saying Mr. Wigmore, you said that the team had learned from the experience of the way data is used in insurance and then applied that to the data that they held within leave.eu and tried to develop the same techniques. Is that correct?
Well, Jerry Gunster's.
Jerry Gunster's, Jerry Gunster helped us.
We paid Jerry Gunster £20,000 a year, a month to look at how you win a referendum. And it was him that originally said you've got to look at 3 or 4 issues, and
then find the areas, areas to do that.
But I think where Andy's overrated the pudding is to say that there were data scientists working on it, etc. We took throughout the campaign we did polling, we did all sorts of stuff, gathering information, and it was pretty apparent where. You had to be sent, and it was everywhere.
And just so you know how that worked, people who phoned up and joined, they would pay money to join Leave.eu as a campaign. That ended up for 50,000 people?
No, miles more than that.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a chunk, and that chunk can be analysed, and we use that very much for our own polling purposes. And
one of the big issues was not just targeting, but the referendum was won on getting the turnout of the people that felt strongly about leave. And so, Dominic Cummings would argue that Farage was toxic, and that might have been true in, I don't know, in the home counties or somewhere where he wasn't very popular. But by sending him to somewhere where he was, That was designed to drive the turnout.
Because as you know, for what there were two elements of the campaign. There is the creative messaging that's designed to be persuading, and then there's the data that directs you as to who that should be, who you should advertise to, and that's not just the way advertising works. No great mystery about that. So in this case, what were the data sets you were using that enabled you to determine when
our members? So that's why I mentioned our members. So our members that signed up, they're all over the country, but you could get little spikes of what they thought in certain areas. You could see it very clearly, and you could see exactly what parts of the country those came from. And so they were the most motivated to join Leave.eu's campaign. So that's where we
had at this stage, over 1 million people following us, and campaign videos were attracting 12, 13 million views.
And you can see where those are.
So you were using location data based on the people that had signed up.
Google Analytics, which is everyone uses in consumer marketing, so it wasn't sophisticated at all, really.
But I will accept that in some of the PR or marketing or spin or whatever you like, if we had our time again, some of the statements I think would have been slightly different.
It wouldn't have been so boastful.
Yeah. Did you acquire any commercially available data sets to support help?
You mean buying lists?
Yeah.
No, we had data coming out of our ears in terms of what was going on with the campaign.
Okay.
Leave.eu was, if you looked at the daily email inbox, it was just, coming in like crazy.
Yeah. Given your experience with Leave.eu, have you been asked about being involved in anti-EU campaigns in other countries?
Well, I think we haven't, but I think Nigel is extremely connected to just about every Eurosceptic campaign in Europe. When I say, connected, he would know this, the Swedish Democrats. He's very friendly with the new Italian, people. Virtually every European Eurosceptic campaign, Nigel would know them extremely well.
And of course, I think that there's no secret about that. But I suppose what I was asking was, you developed with Leave.eu a successful and sophisticated approach to identifying.
It was for one referendum and one referendum only. Yeah. I mean, the experiences were enough. We didn't then offer those services to other countries.
And have people approach you about it? Have people approached you with
well, weirdly, actually, this is way back. We got approached, and we didn't do anything about it, by someone in France. I can't even remember who.
But
we weren't interested in expanding this knowledge into some political machine that we would then sell and offer to other people. Just weren't interested in that.
Before the referendum, one of the people from our office went to visit the Five-Star Movement in Italy. So we had definitely sort of, we were interested in what, as you would be, in what people were doing.
So did you say France was Wigmore?
It was someone in France, yeah. I'll find out. I've probably got it somewhere, but it was nothing. We gave it by the way, and then didn't even. I don't think I even contacted them back.
Frankly, even if there is a second referendum, I don't think it's going to be me involved in that. And if I had my time again, I probably wouldn't have done this all, in the first place.
I mean, there are quite established anti-EU movements in, particularly Eastern Europe. I mean, have you anyone from those countries approached you at all?
No.
Like Ukrainians?
Ukraine as well? Other Soviet republics, I'm sure. I don't think they need an anti-EU movement in Russia, but...
we weren't the official Leave campaign, although we kind of made a lot of noise and all the rest of it. But I don't think outside of a small group of people in our backyard, we were very credible to others. And whilst we might have been effective as a campaign, fine. But Nigel is very different. We are not Nigel Farage. We were.
Thank the Lord.
So I would be very surprised if anyone came knocking on our door. I'd actually be quite flattered if they did, but they haven't. Okay. Apart from this one incident, but that was about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's clear. Brendan O'Hara. Sorry. Charles, you would come in a little bit, wouldn't you? Sorry, Charles.
Just one thought that occurs to me, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to desperately try and ask original questions. But do you think that the breakup of the rest of the EU is in Britain's best interests now?
That's a very good question. I think my belief is it is. And I think half the problem we're struggling with is there's been a tumultuous kind of movement across Europe and in America where there's this desire for change. And so I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, we've got, you know, voted to leave the European Union, we must stay in a single market. It's almost like a prisoner where the door's open and the prisoner's scared to leave, you know, the prison cell. It's been 45 years of institutionalised brainwashing to say, you know, about the European Union. And I think what is going to happen is it will ultimately collapse underneath the pressure that it puts on itself.
Do you believe that the fact that the UK is leaving the EU is an active catalyst in the breakup of the rest of the European Union? And what I'm trying to say is would the European Union start to fragment without Britain?
I suspect that...
that's breaking the wall.
No, I'm not even sure about that, because I think the historical relationship between the EU and the UK, or the Europe and the UK, has always been one of not quite fitting a square peg into a round hole. I think the change of government in Italy, which is, you know, is a massive thing. It's clear that they're going to, you know, cause all sorts of trouble. And I think we're seeing Eurosceptic vote is rising in countries, not falling. So I think, you know, you've had all this global disturbance, but sometimes you need a shake-up.
Mm-hmm. And you're not actively involved in any of those campaigns?
No, not
right. A lot of the questions I was going to ask have indeed been covered, but I'd like to move on to big scary Russia, if I may. Clearly, I get the point that, you know, if the Russian ambassador says come around and have a drink, well, you go. I understand that. But there are emails that were exchanged backwards and forwards. I mean, this relationship went on for quite some time. What were you hoping to gain? What were you going to get out of this?
Well, I was hoping for a good lunch, and that's what I did gain from it. But I mean, if you...
Many good lunches, or...?
Well, no,
the first one was the best.
Well, the first one was the best. But, you know, the Sunday Times wrote 4 pages, you know, front page 2, 3 and 4, on the back of the fact I had a lunch with the Russian ambassador, you know, initially, then that was followed up after we had seen Mr. Trump, President Trump, and the infamous golden apartment doors.
Yep.
And so I would have thought, given that we had met the Russian ambassador, he said, come back in and see me.
But was there any exchange of information on that, political information?
What political information?
Well, because I mean, it seems like an ideal opportunity, doesn't it? Really?
The only thing we gave in the second meeting was the telephone numbers telephone number of the transition team, as the Russians wanted to get hold of the transition team. Now, we had been to visit Trump Tower. It was utter chaos. I'm distracting with all walking about, sorry. So we'd arrived there. There were 40,000 demonstrators outside Trump Tower. We were locked in this 6 hours, I think, in Trump Tower, a bit like the Russian, you know, same length. And so we ended up in Kellyanne Conway's office. She popped down and said, "Do you want to see the boss?" I said, "Well, of course we do."
So no, this idea that this whole meeting was planned to go and see Trump, it wasn't. Nigel had gone to do a speech in Florida. We thought, wouldn't it be fun to go up to New York and meet him, see if we could meet some of the people we'd met and just have a drink and a thank you with them. They said, yes, come and see us. We walked down Fifth Avenue, 40,000 people coming swearing everything they could possibly say about Trump. We get locked in, the Secret Service locks in, you've got to stay here. There was obviously chaos because, you know, they'd suddenly won. We were sitting in Kellyanne Conway's, and I'll tell you what happened. This young girl who was on the transition desk, and she'd obviously been there a while, she said, "You're British. Do you have the telephone number for number 10 Downing Street? Because they called and I haven't got a number for them." And I looked at her and said, "Why?" She said, "Because we've had no relationship with the British or many of these governments because they didn't think we were going to win." So with astonishment, I gave it to her. That's the number I've got. And she asked me about a number of other embassies, which I did have numbers for, and I gave it to those. I said to her,
extent of your exchange of information.
Yes. No, I said to her, "What if someone wants to get in touch with you?" She said, "Here's a number. You can give them that." So when we went to see, 2 days later, I came back, and the first thing I went to was an event at Buckingham Palace for the Queen's Canopy Project.
There was a number of. Can I come back to Russia? Sorry,
but this is relevant because you need to understand. You need to understand the process because this is important. I met lots of the diplomatic community who I've known very well for a long time. They asked me exactly the same question. and they were obviously seeing the picture. They wanted to know what had happened, so I told them. And then, without exception, every single one, how do we get in touch with the Trump transition team? Because our government has done no preparatory work for him becoming president. That's how shocking. They weren't prepared for him. So I said, this is the number I've got. So then when we went to see the Russian ambassador, and he couldn't believe Trump had won, he was very explicit. He said, like everyone else, we have done no preparatory work. We didn't think he was going to win, and we did not even know how to get in touch with him. Do you have a number? And I said, just so happens, yes, I do. And so I gave him the number, and he disappeared, and he said, can I pass this back? And I said, well, of course. He disappeared for about 10 minutes, wasn't it? And then he came back and said, thank you very much for that. And I said, I'm astonished. What do you mean? He said, nobody thought he'd win. What people seem to forget, nobody thought Trump would win.
You do appreciate from the outside point of view, it does look extraordinary that you went to meet these two very powerful, influential people. Of course. And that was all that happened.
Yes, but
what do you mean all? We gave them their telephone number. I mean, that's what they asked for.
But we were. But the picture. But you've got to remember, meeting President Trump was not planned. Kellyanne Conway saw Nigel, gave him a big hug, saw me, nothing. We had to chat. She said, "So we go and see the boss." It wasn't planned. So we went up and saw him at literally with a spur of the moment because she thought it might be a nice idea for the president to see Nigel. And so we then spent a lovely hour and a half with President-elect 2 days after this extraordinary experience, having a chat.
Can we put one question to bed? Did you ever accept money from the Russian government to get on the referendum?
Yet.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask, who are big data dolphins?
Well, big data dolphins, after the... we've got, as I said, we've got a team that work on artificial intelligence and big data in Bristol on the insurance side. So effectively what happened was that, I think it was when we met the governor of Mississippi. So we had met the governor of Mississippi, which was at the Republican National Convention, and we started talking about the fact we had a data analytic and big, just talk about your business interests and what you do. And he said, why don't you start part of it in Mississippi? So we said, well, that sounds really interesting. So we created sort of a company called Big Data Dolphins. And actually we were going to do a project in Mississippi with the university on insurance fintech. So essentially creating artificial intelligence, to be used in the insurance industry. And that is how the Big Data Dolphin, stuff comes about. So we're creating a kind of, let's put it this way, Big Data Dolphins is our artificial intelligence unit for use in the insurance industry.
And are you the owner of Big Data Dolphins?
Probably. I'm the owner of all of it, aren't I?
Sorry?
I own all of it, yes.
Right, so you are the owner. So,
yeah.
So what is the relationship between Big Data Dolphins and Eldon Insurance?
Well, Eldon Insurance is a UK insurance broker. Big Data Dolphins is a company set up to do artificial intelligence and big data and analytics in the insurance industry. And the plan was to take some of the concepts we had in the UK, take it to the University of Mississippi, and to hire graduates and different people like this to work on our insurance big data project.
Modelling, to try to get them to explore and understand.
Artificial intelligence can be used in such a way that you can know whether someone's likely to renew a policy by the profile of the person. There's all sorts of things you can learn from the data using artificial intelligence that's helpful for an insurance business.
So what's the current nature of the operation at Mississippi University?
Well, this is, if I've got a gripe, this is sort of coming towards it. So can I talk about it, or?
I think if we could follow responding to Mr. O'Hara's question.
Fine.
So if at the end of that there's something we've not covered you want to talk about, then I'm happy
fine,
to do
okay. So the Mississippi. So basically, there's nothing in Mississippi. We have no staff. We've got an empty office, which effectively we just recently, I think it was last month, signed a lease on, and essentially it was a project with the university that was meant to go live about a year ago, but actually has been delayed, and at the moment it's not operational.
Okay, so if there's nothing happening in Mississippi, why, Mr. Wigmore, did you tell Dr. Emma Bryant in October of 17, and I quote, "It's been going for 9 months, we've been testing for 12 months now, testing all the insurance against it, and it's extraordinary."
Mr. Wigmore got mixed up. It
Ah,
was
Bristol.
our Bristol
office.
operation.
Oh, Bristol and Mississippi got mixed up.
No.
No, but just saying the operation is live and it's been going for a while. It's just it hasn't managed to move over into Mississippi.
I just want to be absolutely clear on that. There is no operation in Mississippi. The University of Mississippi have been in a court of law, which we'll come on to later, and have stated under oath that there is no operation in Mississippi, and we've said the same. And Mr. Wigmore got it wrong, unfortunately.
So there's nothing happening in Mississippi.
He was referring to our Bristol operation and the fact we had plans to open up a data unit in Mississippi, but we haven't done it yet.
Okay, so why did you sign a lease for premises in Mississippi?
Because we were going to open it up. That was the plan.
If we want to go back to the sequence of events, we met Governor Phil Bryant, or you did, Andy, and Nigel, at the Republican National Convention, which was after the referendum, so it predated it. We then were invited to Jackson, Mississippi, where Nigel gave a speech for Trump at a campaign rally, 20,000 people in a baseball stadium somewhere, and we had a number of conversations afterwards. The timeline, it's quite impossible for us to have had an operation in Mississippi. We hadn't even met them until that point. But where it's, I can accept there is some confusion. We have a Bristol operation that deals in artificial intelligence and big data, and we have plans to open one up in Mississippi on the insurance industry.
And it's taken
And we only signed the lease on the building last month.
It's taken us that long to get to that stage because of the various legal loopholes you have to go through working with the Mississippi and actually starting a company in the United States. It took longer than we
As
thought.
it stands right now, there's an empty office in Mississippi, and I do want to cover some of what's been said down there, particularly in view of this is a committee looking into fake news.
Yeah, but you'll forgive me if I pursue this a bit longer.
No, go ahead.
Again, in 2017, you're on the record, you're quoted as saying, "We have started an operation at Old Miss University in Mississippi, which is the Centre for Artificial Intelligence in the world." Now,
I was wrong.
there's not an awful lot of wiggle room there between a misunderstanding of an operation in Bristol and saying quite categorically.
By the way, I wasn't operational. The person that actually was delivering this project was someone else. I was explaining how I viewed it and what our intention, our plans were.
Andy's head of communications of PR, and he didn't know what he was talking about.
Basically.
Okay.
That's
So
not
there's
the
been
first
no-
time that's happened.
No.
So the plans for Mississippi is to what?
Well, it was. I don't think it's going to happen now.
I think it's been killed in the long grass.
So all of
The idea was to have somewhere where you could absolutely look at artificial intelligence.
What it was we've already, most insurance companies in the UK, by the way, are deploying artificial intelligence, machine learning, and various big data analytics. I go as far as to say, if they're not, they're going to be out of business in the next year or two. Every insurance company is doing this. So I can accept that I can see where you're coming from with the question, but the fact of the matter is that the project at the University of Mississippi did not go forward, and we've only recently just signed the lease on the building last month, and Old Miss University themselves have got up in a court of law under oath and said this project hasn't started.
And why did it all come about? Because someone on this committee had given you evidence suggesting that she was convinced this was happening.
Yeah, or might have happened.
Might have happened.
So and
as a consequence of that, the newspapers in Mississippi in the United Kingdom started reporting on this idea that we had used Mrs. Mississippi and data in the referendum. We hadn't even met them during the referendum.
If I could just sort of clarify that. So I think it was Brittany Kaiser that said, and they sent the data down to Mississippi because she had read it somewhere else. And it was sort of, that was complete hearsay. So what has happened now is there's a group called the Fair Vote Project, who are a pro-Remain second referendum group, have gone down to Mississippi and they've used evidence from this committee, namely from Brittany Kaiser
and Emma Bryant,
yeah, to say that we have a, artificial intelligence unit, and the data from the referendum have been inappropriately used in that centre. Now, as part of that court hearing, the university have got up and said, "I'm sorry, this is, completely wrong." The person we allocated to run the project, who hasn't got started, got up on the stand and said, "There are no staff, there are no servers, there is no business there."
Look, could I ask you then, why, if it is so dead in the water, did you sign a lease last month?
It's not dead. It's in the water in the sense that it's a university and it's been taking a long time to get to where we wanted to get with it. So we had actually signed the lease on the building. It is a live project.
So it is a live project. So,
yes.
so there are plans.
But we're just saying. I think after all of this,
probably kill it.
that the University of Mississippi, PR communications area have, had calls in the Sydney Herald on it. They're probably not going to go ahead with it.
Have any of your companies ever scraped data from your customers or followers on Facebook?
No. Other than obviously the vote leave allegation that they scrape Google data and send it to physicists.
Was it ever the intention of the project in Mississippi to scrape the data?
We certainly looked at whether that was feasible to do, because I think even Facebook itself had a venture with Admiral Insurance.
In the United States, yeah.
No, in the UK, where Facebook itself had teamed up with Admiral to, basically look to see how you could scrape Facebook data and how you could use it in the insurance industry. But I have to say again, it goes back to the point of what is your intention and what is your action. This project has not even started. So even if we may have had an intention to look at Facebook scraping, we haven't done it.
But in her evidence to the court in Mississippi just last week, Victoria Senna was asked under what circumstances is Eldon or Big Data, Eldon ever scraped data, personal Facebook, etc., and she says it has not done that. Neither company has done it, and she replied, neither, it's illegal, so we wouldn't do it for that reason. But yet, I have an email from the 15th of October in which, again, it's quite clear that we'd like to acquire more sources of data, and it's our plans to use software we have purchased to scrape social media data, Facebook profiles from our customers for starters, and it would fit in well with what's expected from Mississippi.
Yeah. So I can understand why you're concerned, but as I say, when you're in business, you go through all of the possible things that you might look at. And as I say, Admiral Insurance actually had a project with Facebook to scrape the data and then to analyse it. And my understanding of this whole issue is that, multiple, commercial interests have A, done it, and B, thought about doing it. But I go back to my point. The operation in Mississippi hasn't started. You can't. I mean, you can sit and say, "What was your intention? Why did you want to do it?" But the fact of the matter is, we haven't.
So, was your intention to use scraped Facebook and data and use it in Mississippi?
I've just answered the question.
But that was
we would
the
have looked
intention.
at a whole range of commercial applications. Then to say, well, you intended to do it. You actually, in business, you go through everything. Quite often we get faced with ethical dilemmas of what we should do or what we shouldn't do, and you hope you make the right decision.
But would that not be a legal dilemma if it was UK citizens' data that was then being sent to be processed in Mississippi?
No data has been sent to Mississippi. Yeah, we would have lawyers go through all this, we'd work out what the legal framework was. The project hasn't even started.
So you categorically can tell me that no British citizens' data was ever sent outside of the UK by you?
Categorically. We hadn't even met with people from Mississippi until the Republican National Convention after the referendum. We have not sent data anywhere. Okay. By the way, it's interesting with all of this because I've seen no evidence other than hearsay of what Brittany said and she said and he said and she said. Where is the evidence of this?
The evidence?
Well, the evidence that we sent data to Mississippi.
It's just based on something I said.
Well,
yes.
You're quite a good source.
I'm a good source.
You're a well-placed source.
I'm a well-placed source.
To suddenly, as we've seen so often from this committee, very, very well-placed sources, when faced with an accusation, throw their hands up and say, I either got it spectacularly wrong, or in other cases, I lied through my teeth. So that's the problem.
As a PR person, you're an agent provocateur, not the underwear, but that is what you are. You are there to provoke, you are there to sell. You are there to put on a good face or whatever it is to a situation. All I was talking about to her was general conversation about what we were doing while we were doing it.
I mean, you guys have all got spat, well, you would have spats if you're ministers, you've got, assistants, you spin like crazy.
But this committee is charged with getting to the truth.
Wow.
And the problem we have in getting to the truth is every time we get closer to somebody who has gone on the record and is then in fear of being caught, they throw their hands up in horror and say, I was wrong or I lied.
Well, That's
the problem.
Can I just say, there is a court case now going on in Mississippi. So it's in front of a judge who has heard the evidence from the Fair Vote Project. But one of my concerns is that, this committee released a bit of information to Emma Bryant to say it came from the parliamentary committee.
I can explain the process of it,
but I would like to just finish.
Sure.
And if there's an innocent explanation, brilliant. But the fact is, it was released a couple of days before or the day before the court case, and we can't understand why the committee has to release her tape recording when she had it herself. So why couldn't she just release it to the court herself? And we know as well that the ICO wrote a letter of support to the Fair Vote Project, which is a second referendum campaign. Now you can see it from my point of view, Damien, that we feel slightly got at, and accepting the fact that Andy, caused the problem, that information has come from Brittany Kaiser, which she's a fantasist. I mean, we've seen that with her remarks on Julia Assange and various other things. But information was sent from this committee to be used in the court case. Then the Fair Vote Project actually put on their website, thank you very much, DCMS committee, for your support. And then they tweeted out. So I'm sure there is an innocent
Which, by the way, in Mississippi, they actually picked up on that as what you had done.
Used in the court
it's been
case.
used in the court to actually give it credibility.
Final comment. You can see it from my point of view. We're obviously passionate Brexiteers. The committee is less keen on the referendum result. And this Fair Vote Project is demonstrably a second referendum campaign. And what business have the ICO got supporting a second referendum campaign in Mississippi? If they were so concerned about it, why didn't they take out their own legal case as a regulator rather than back in a second referendum campaign? And so that is my big issue, and I think if that...
I mean, you said that clearly. I can just say that the Emma Bryant gave us the recording of the transcript of Andy Wigmore's interview, the relevant piece. She gave it to us a couple of weeks before it was published. It obviously was of interest to us because your interview appears to support in some way what Brittany Kaiser had said, because certainly taking on face value what you'd said, and therefore it was of relevance to the work of the committee. It was published on that Monday last week, simply because the House had been in recess for the Whitsun recess, so that was the first opportunity we'd had to consider it, publish it. Otherwise it would have been done probably the previous week.
If you can see it from my point of view, the committee sending evidence to be used in a court in Mississippi.
Well, we didn't send it to them. We published it on our website.
They're publicly thanking you.
But the ICO is even thanking you.
Yeah.
So, which is, I refer to your letter of the 4th of June addressed to Mr. Collins in respect of your investigation into Eldon Insurance and the representation of data at the University of Mississippi. And that was conveniently given to the court at exactly the same time as this data her evidence was then released. So if you, again, looking at from our perspective, it's just rather odd.
Well, the ICO will intervene if they feel that the case is relevant and important to them. Yeah. And of course, and the ICO, and I believe what this is a data preservation case. Yeah. So if the ICO feel that they want to go and inspect that data, then they could do that. Now, you're quite right, the ICO could bring their own legal action to do that, but I can't really speak to the motivation of the ICO. All I would say on this is that the idea, which I think you referred to in your newspaper article today, that we were somehow working with this campaign group is not true. Our involvement in this was Emma Bryant giving evidence to us, which we published as part of our inquiry, which they then subsequently used as part of their legal proceedings. And it is no more complicated than that.
But you can see it from my point of view that the Fair Vote project is a second referendum campaign. It's backed by a byline that have been repeatedly and viciously attacking us, and the Guardian and all the rest of that. So from that point of view, the fact that they suddenly produce evidence from the DCMS committee the day before the court hearing, they produce a letter from the ICO saying that you communicated with them, it doesn't look very good. So from my point of view, and I kind of accept what you're saying, that in all of this it gets dreadfully complicated, doesn't it? But you have to say it's a second referendum campaign. The ICO, if they wanted to...
You look like you're supporting it.
Yeah, we've got no involvement with that campaign, or that campaign has no interest to the work of this committee.
But they publicly thanked you.
Well, they may have done. But all I say is our involvement with this was purely with Emma Bryant. Emma Bryant who approached the committee with the transcript and the recording, and which we published.
Was she compelled to do that?
No,
she wasn't. Okay, with the evidence she gave, she was compelled to give evidence. Yeah. That's the exact statement she gave.
I'm sorry, you're quite right. She made us aware of the existence of the evidence. Yeah. We did order it.
But she made a big thing in court.
Order its receipts, yes, we did.
She made a big thing in the court in Mississippi of saying this is evidence from the committee, and they based their whole case around evidence from this committee. So my point is, where does the role of a committee investigating what has happened turn into an active participant in what is a legal case?
All I can say is that we would not have accepted or published the evidence unless we felt it was relevant to our inquiry, and we felt it was relevant to our inquiry because that interview appeared to corroborate what Brittany Kaiser had said, and so therefore we considered it to be important, and that's why we published it. And it was only published on the Monday the day before.
But did they ask you to publish it?
Sorry?
Did they ask you to publish it when you published it?
No, we were not in a position to be able to publish anything because the House was in recess. So we said that we would consider the evidence when we had the chance to meet after the recess, which was on Monday. So it wasn't. It wouldn't have been possible for us to publish evidence while the House is in sitting.
I do think, I accept what you say. That's fine, but what I do think is for the ICO to actively support a legal case against a referendum campaign for a second referendum
is odd.
It's outrageous. I mean, the regulator should be above all this, and they should lodge their own court case.
You mean that? I mean, that's really, I think, very much a matter for the ICO. I mean, I think I've explained the reason the committee published that evidence and why we published it on the day that we did.
In the letter they are thanking the
ICO. They may well do. But I mean, but in some ways, if you've just said that there's no work being done there, you've got nothing to hide, there's no data being held there. So in some ways, whatever the verdict of this court case in Mississippi, if what you're saying is correct, then nothing will come of it because there's nothing to investigate, there's nothing to see.
Well, it's an injunction against the data they say is held at the University of Mississippi, who have denied it under oath.
So if it's an injunction not to destroy data that doesn't exist, that's not going to cause anyone any harm, is it?
I completely agree, but there is a political aspect to it because our friends over there in the corner love to conflate this kind of thing into great news to us.
Can I just ask one follow-up question following Brendan's questions on this? Is Victoria Senna went out from Bristol, I think, to go and work in Mississippi on this project. And the email from David Taylor at Rock Services that Brendan referred to earlier and quoted from was sent to her. That was sent out in October. When did Victoria actually go? When did she go out to Mississippi?
Oh, blimey, she hasn't actually been living out in Mississippi. She's just been going. I mean, it's a project that is not up and running. So she's made a number of visits to Mississippi to talk to the university, but half of our problem is the university is very slow moving. It's a big institution, so she's been over there, she's come back, she's had communication with the university. I'm just trying to think when Victoria started.
I was just trying to remember the same thing. We can find that out.
She was a clerk on the Treasury Select Committee, actually. So
obviously this email, I think email was produced in evidence in the court hearing.
Sorry, when is the email dated?
15th of October, 2017.
17. Well, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So was that point? Was she just travelling out on an ad hoc basis, or was she based there for prolonged periods?
No, she's been going out on a
ad hoc
basis, and spent a little bit of time there working with the university. Then comes back.
Yeah. Okay. And you said that you've been asked several times about whether data was transferred out there.
Yeah.
You said no. Is it possible that people working at Ole Miss University could have remote access to any data sets?
No, it's possible.
And they've denied that under oath, by the way, as well. So, the transcript from the court case, I think, is available. So you can see what the University of Mississippi had to say on it, and if you want us to submit it as evidence, we can send it in.
Okay, thank you. Ultimately, it's now a matter for the judge in Mississippi is what happens next.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's that. I just wanted, I think with this closing, I'm sorry, Rebecca Powell, you had a question.
Just a clarification about Eldon, which I asked a question about before. Did you loan any of those staff to the Labour Leave campaign?
No. The Labour Leave campaign, if it had any involvement, would have been with Leave.eu staff in the Millbank London office. There were you and about 3 or 4 other people.
Yeah.
But I'm led to believe that an Eldon insurance employee registered a domain which was labourleave.org.
We registered hundreds of domains.
Yeah.
So that would have been someone in the marketing department just register these, please. And I don't know when they registered it.
Yeah, I mean,
so they did work for you.
Registering domains, we've probably got an area of the business that registers domains. We would have said register these domains.
Is that a normal thing to keep for your staff to keep doing and you're not to know anything about?
Well, I don't know which. You literally got me on that one. I would have to go and find out which area of the business registers domain names.
Well, we got the name of the person that it was, but then what was quite interesting was that Labour Leave on its website actually changed that domain very slightly
I think
from .org to .org.uk, and I'm just wondering, do you think that was suggested trying to hide anything, trying to hide any sort of historical registrations?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the Labour Leave emails and
that's right.
Emails and websites were blocked by Vote Leave in an attempt to try and make them come back to their offices.
So Brendan Chilton and the other staff couldn't get their emails?
They locked them out of their emails and websites and everything. So, yeah, if you want to give me the details, I'll look into who registered the domains, but I just, off the top of my head, I can't tell you.
Okay, thank you. Julian Wright.
You said before about, I think Mr. Banks, about Brittany Casey, said that she was a fantasist. What is it about her evidence, do you think, that sort of is indicative of that fantasism?
Well, I think the subsequent press conference she called after the appearance here, I mean, the following day, she appeared at a press conference to launch a part of a business called Rest in Peace Personal Data. So she had
every motivation.
She had every motivation to create sensational testimony, and then she launched her kind of campaign in data thereafter. But the thing for me that I wonder whether it's fantastical is, I think it was reported in the Financial Times that she said she went to visit Julian Assange on the behest of Cambridge Analytica, essentially to help with the US elections and to provide wiki funds with cryptocurrency to fund their efforts. And I mean, in the weird and wonderful world of politics, all things are possible. But it struck me that she was presented to this committee as an honest whistleblower employee that was, fighting for truth and justice.
We called her because she was relevant to the inquiry. Because she had worked on the project with Leave.eu.
Yeah.
She'd worked at Cambridge Analytica. She had knowledge of that, and as you know from the testimony, if you either read or seen, we covered a very wide range of topics on a lot of the.
I'm not saying she wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't correct that she was called, but what I'm saying is, I find it quite strange behaviour if she was an honest employee of the company that was shocked by the behaviour of the management, to then say that she went to visit Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy. And
what about the evidence pertaining to your company that she provided? What about any evidence?
Well, the evidence that she supplied was wholly wrong.
When you say by wrong, what do you mean by wrong? Do you mean
well, I remind me of the specific bits, but the Mississippi, bit, and also the Eldon insurance staff were working on the campaign when she came to the call centre. We had clearly demarked it and hired staff into that campaign.
Most of Eldon's in Newcastle anyway.
Yeah, I was supposed to term actually.
This is actually quite critical to it. She said that she visited an insurance call centre, and that staff were mingling and working between the two. But our actual insurance call centre is in Durban, South Africa. Our Bristol office is an administrative head office with accountants, actuaries. It's a very dull place.
She never went to Newcastle.
I do have some experience of that.
So, not an actuary.
It isn't a rock and roll lifestyle.
No, but what I'm saying is, she specifically said she visited an insurance call centre. It is not possible to have done that in Bristol, because a few years ago we actually outsourced the kind of customer service to Durban, South Africa, where we've got 400 employees, and there are no operational calls taken in Bristol. So if I take that point, along with, she had obviously heard something about Mississippi, and pumped out that information. Now that bit of it is possibly reasonable because of misleading statements that were made.
Okay. What's your sort of view then in terms of the...
But can I just also say, because you mentioned Brittany Kaiser, Carol's other wonderful key witness was Christopher Wiley, that you will remember, with the pink hair and sort of earrings and all the rest of that. Well, he is saying that 3 months ago he had emails that were stolen from us, that apparently Isabel Oakeshott said was stolen, and then passed on to a third party, and that went to the Guardian and Byline and various other people that then used it to create the Sunday story. So yet again, if these people are honest whistleblowers, why would he say that he had our emails and had supplied them to British and US intelligence?
But
so it's just
I think
credibility.
Just to make clear on that, from based on what Mr. Wiley has told me, certainly, is that he was aware of the existence of the emails, but he certainly didn't have copies of them at that point.
On Twitter, he said he passed them to US and British intelligence.
I believe he made them aware of their existence too, but they didn't physically have them, as far as my understanding. But Mr. Wiley can speak. I'm sure Mr. Wiley can put a statement out and read himself.
If I go back to the genesis of it, I can accept we're to blame partially for this, because I can see why misunderstandings have arisen. But if you look at the sequence of events where you investigate Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, the whole thing, and then you move through the sequence of events, the Electoral Commission then investigates us off the back of all of this data, then the ICO, but it all really comes from two witnesses that really do lack credibility.
Well, I think, sorry, no question, but I think remember how this started as well, which was a story about a data breach involving Cambridge Analytica, which which has been validated by Facebook itself. So
fair enough. But I'm saying the two key whistleblowers, did present themselves as honest, decent employees of the company that wouldn't ever do anything, and as we've seen, that's not quite the case.
What do you think of Cambridge Analytica's activities?
The Channel 4 thing?
No, I don't refer actually to that, but in terms of more generally about their use of data and
Well,
their
see,
influence.
in campaigning, you when you go and get yourself elected, you knock on someone's door and you take a canvass return and things like that. That's an analogue way of doing exactly what Cambridge Analytica were doing, but in a digital way, and that's how things are moving. So what were they doing in politics is not unusual. By the way, there is 100 different Cambridge Analyticas out there. You could blame any of them. What they were doing in consumer marketing was no clever than any of the other organisations that do this in consumer marketing.
All in politics, these groups claim to all have the black box to the success of whatever it is. My view of life goes back to what I said originally. Was I think it was an ad agency with a very slick, story. Now, I think also they obviously got themselves involved in elections overseas and did all sorts of nefarious things, which no one can approve of that, can they?
Just final question, Chair. Just in terms of, I'm taking it basically from that sort of line of your answer, effectively. You sort of feel as if effectively that your campaign was just a little bit smarter when it comes to data than, say, the Remain, the Stronger In campaign. And you think that's really what the route is?
It's a mixture of things.
You look at Obama. I mean, he won off the back of his Facebook and social media campaign.
He pioneered it.
All the liberal and more left-leaning people thought that was a fabulous thing. He'd discovered gold dust. When it goes the other way, it's not quite the same.
Thank you, Chair.
I think we have a vote now on the withdrawal bill. We may have to break for 15 minutes while we go and vote. But if you can bear with us, we don't have too many more questions after this, so we probably won't go on too much longer after we get back. But
I think we've got lunch, haven't we?
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Bring the committee back to order. We'll resume the proceedings. Thank you for your patience during the vote, and we just have a few more questions to ask. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that the programmation on the European withdrawal bill has passed.
Oh, superb! Yeah.
So it'll be debated the timetable over the next 2 days. Just was one thing I wanted to pick up from some of the earlier evidence, Mr. Banks. Just why, with the you said you made the donation to UKIP, so they would have the funds to settle the invoice Cambridge Analytica sent in. Why did you believe that that invoice should be paid?
I think the data had been sent to Cambridge Analytica to kind of analyse. I thought that they were. I mean, it was basically handed over to UKIP, so I thought they had done some work for UKIP, which is hence the invoice. But then UKIP turned around and said, well, we don't believe this is of any value.
So you felt that the honourable thing to do was to settle the invoice of what had been done? I think
it kind of worked the other way around, that I made the donation to UKIP to settle the bill, and then they rather decided that it wasn't worth the money, but they kept the donation anyway.
So you didn't ask for the money back, actually?
No.
But you also felt that for you to make the donation for that express purpose, so that the bill could be paid without it being a draw on UKIP's reserves, you must have felt that the work had been done, that there was something had been done that deserves to be paid for.
What little remained of UKIP's resources?
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. We knew that they had sent the data to Cambridge Analytica, and they were meant to be doing a scoping exercise, which they said they had done.
Well, why didn't you just say, well, this is a matter for UKIP and Cambridge Analytica, and if Cambridge Analytica feel like
sequence of events that I think, I may be wrong about this, Andy, but I think they were looking at rebranding UKIP and looking at how it could reposition itself. I made the donation, but it was UKIP that had to settle the bill, and they actually then
also
just didn't do it.
In context, just been a general election, so they hadn't done very well. So part of this regenesis of UKIP was absolutely a topic that they were looking into, extensively. So that was where part of this had come from, and no one was sure if there was going to be a referendum. If you remember that time, just after the general election, they'd said it, but still no one was sure when it was going to be a long way or a short way across. And so they went on.
No, I think that's wrong. It was after the general election when we missed the nut, or they didn't sort of...
Yes, and the different leaders.
It's just interesting, because obviously your only connection is that obviously you have a relationship with UKIP as a UKIP supporter, and your support for Nigel Farage. You have a relationship with Cambridge Analytica because you're discussing working with them on the referendum. But this project, this UKIP project, has really got nothing to do with you. So I wonder why you felt you should step in and effectively help UKIP settle the bill.
I thought that Cambridge Analytica were going to do some scoping work for UKIP. That's what they were meant to be doing. That's why I made the donation. But then UKIP, for whatever reason, decided not. I think it was at a time, by the way, when there was relationships were fraying and Nigel was on the way out. There were all sorts of things going on. So I think it just kind of fell between that kind of period.
Yeah, but so just repeat the question. It's just you could have had nothing to do with it and just said, well, Cambridge Analytica could pursue this if they want to.
But I chose to make a donation. But I donated it to UKIP. It should have, whether they disclosed it or didn't disclose it, I have no visibility. But we know that we, gave the donation, and there we are.
Why didn't you just pay? You could have just paid it yourself. You could just pay Cambridge Analytica yourself.
I don't know. That's just the way it was.
Okay. I just want to ask a few final questions relating to Russia. Obviously, the story of the weekend. We've touched on this a bit already, so I don't want to go over old ground on that. But I imagine that you could probably see that one of the reasons this has attracted the attention that it has is because it discloses events, contact that hadn't previously been discussed, that wasn't included in your book. And why was it that, particularly in your book, Bad Boys of Brexit, appreciate that some of these meetings take place after the book finishes, but why wasn't more of this discussed and disclosed in the book?
The book ends with us in Jackson, Mississippi. That's the last page of the book. And at that stage, my sole involvement really with the Russians was the lunch with the ambassador, and this follow-up meeting with the 6 gold mines and the consolidation of that.
But also, Russia wasn't really interesting. With everything that went on, it was just a snapshot of all sorts of things we
now, if you look at what was our, do we want to hide it? What I wrote about it in the book, I gave the emails that were stolen, from his balloon shot. I gave all this information in there. So if I was intent on, hiding my involvement with the Russians, I did a pretty bad job of that.
We removed nothing.
We've got two final things to say, so I don't know if you want to leave it to the end or whether we can quickly
if it's relevant to this, when you say that now, then we can...
it's very relevant because it's about the level of contact with the Russians and the Sunday Times story, which was quite an extravaganza. They say I went to Moscow in February following the meeting. Now, when they contacted me, I was at a cricket match on Friday afternoon, and I was struggling with dates and sort of times. They were throwing everything at me. I've subsequently gone back through my 2 passports and looked out what Russian visas that I've actually got in the passports. You quite have, if someone wants to photocopy the passports, they're quite welcome to do so. The second one is completely blank. There's a reason for that, which if anyone wants to ask me, I can explain. There are 2 Russian visas. So effectively, the Russian visa, first one was March 15, and the second one was October 14. So I actually wasn't in Moscow in February 16. So the Sunday Times article that said I travelled to Moscow, I've got fairly definitive proof here that no, I didn't.
Your diary.
There we are. I also, on the Monday when I got into the office, printed out a copy of my office diary, which you're very welcome to have a copy of. And in fact, the only thing of note in the office diary was on the 17th of February, we got a donation from Peter Hargreaves of £3.3 million for Leave campaign, where he wrote to 10 million people personally in an attempt to contact people. In fact, that's when he said he was going to donate it, sorry. And so we went off skiing in Wengen. And so you're very happy to have a copy of the office diary, my passports. The reason I got a blank passport is my PA keeps it. Because on one occasion my Russian wife stole my passport when I was about to travel abroad because she didn't like the trip I was going on. And so my PA has always kept a blank passport in case this should ever happen again.
Okay, well, if your wife didn't know about that, she does now.
So
she knows
I don't know if anyone,
you've offered those.
wants to.
We'd be more than happy to publish that as written evidence if you want, giving it to the committee.
I've absolutely got no issues with it at all.
No, but those are the only 2 passports you have.
I knew you were going to say that. These are the only 2 passports I've got. Yes.
Is it? How would you explain this mix-up then around this supposed trip to Moscow, which you said you've got no records that you were on, and that was made? How do you account for this mix-up in that case? If this allegation has come from the contents of the emails, what is it possible that you were represented by other people at that meeting?
Absolutely not. And in fact, I mentioned the fact I went to the Kremlin. I did. I wandered around and had a look at the historical sites. I went to the museum, and I went for a trip down the river, but that was actually in 2015. I'm sorry about that, but I was at a cricket match. I was bounced. I mean, I had about 10,000 questions about Lord Guthrie, Goldfinger.
Just fallen off his horse.
And a whole range of other things. And so on Monday, when I went back to the office and checked the actual fact, I didn't travel to Moscow in 2016. So I don't know if anyone wishes to take that.
Well, we can take that one.
Just so you know, because I can remember teasing many journalists when they ask, where is Aaron? I would often used to say he's in Moscow, he's in Russia, because of the variety of stuff that just come out about Aaron being an agent from a document which is called the Atlantic Council document, which accused him of being absolutely all those things. We tease people
that to one side, because I do want to go through that, the origins of where the allegations of Russian dark money came from. But I just wanted to nail one thing. I was not in Moscow in February 2016. My passports clearly show it, and no, I don't have a third passport, I can assure you.
So if the emails contain, so there's just an email that Andy said to a journalist, you're in Moscow or in Russia, that's just Andy being Andy.
Yeah.
Sorry? Did he today?
Oh.
So you're telling me
my job is to be provocative.
No,
that's my job.
yeah.
But I'm trying to give you. I've got
a sense of
What's the
humour.
difference between provocation and lies, Mr. Wigmore?
But there's also a sense of
Is
humour.
there any difference?
There's lots of sort of difference. If you're trying to sell something or put a good case over to somebody, you will tell the best story. If that's provocation or a lie or a lie, if you want to call it that.
Is that how your side, the Leave campaign, won the referendum?
Operated on lies.
I'm sorry, you're allowed to have a sense of humour. You seem to be quite humorless, but you are allowed to have a sense of humour. I had, these allegations of Russian dark money. Oh, he's in Moscow.
It's a joke because it's so absurd.
Well, not for the first time. These hairs have been running by your press man, who's spreading confusion. That's the. I mean, if he always told the truth, we wouldn't be here.
David, I'm willing to accept that as a reasonable criticism. But the fact is, we were not in Moscow. And if anyone's got evidence I was in Moscow, please bring it forward. Okay?
That was Friday.
There was a cricket match on Friday when the Times called me and bombarded me with all of this stuff.
Obviously, I think one of the questions we have to ask you about what was in the papers, and particularly with regards to discussions around business deals and the like, is did you do business in Russia as a consequence of these meetings you had?
Yeah, I've got no business interests in Russia, and I have done no business deals in Russia. And in fact, the sequence of events, which was somewhat sensationalised in the Sunday Times, was that the ambassador introduced us to this guy that had, I can't remember his name now, the 6 Russian gold mines that he thought would be interesting to consolidate. And so what we did was we met with him. I'm a businessman, why shouldn't I? I thought it was interesting. I then approached Lord Guthrie, who is an international expert on Russia. He was non-executive director of one of the largest London-listed gold mines. And effectively, he said, be very careful dealing with Russia, which is probably wise and prescient advice. And he said, but if you are interested, you're going to go and see my friend Peter Hambro, who's chairman of the largest listed Russian gold mining company on the London Stock Exchange. We went and saw Peter Hambro for 40 minutes. He said, it's fraught with issues. I wouldn't recommend you go ahead with it, or it's problematic. And at that point, it dropped away. Now I see as well in one of the other papers in The Guardian, even is
Financial Times.
No, Guardian today says, oh, and the deal went ahead and things happened 15 days after the referendum. The Guardian newspaper didn't say what deal, who it was, and who was involved. No transparency whatsoever, so I haven't got a clue what they're talking about. But what I know is, we saw Lord Guthrie, who we knew. He said, be circumspect about Russia, referred us to Peter Hambro, and the deal didn't go ahead.
And Mr. Hambro confirmed that into the Financial Times.
So yet again, it's a case of, well, you meet with someone, and therefore it has to be nefarious because you met with them. We just want one final thing, and then we're done. So we've finished. In respect of the Russian allegations, we had lunch with the Russian ambassador originally. We met after the Trump, visit, and I met once with this businessman. So that's the extent of it. But in the meantime, we were slightly worried. Not worried, but subsequently thinking that actually we ought to, make sure that we absolutely, keep people informed of what we're doing. And we were in. Do you want to just go through this?
But you missed a bit. Actually, this is quite important. And Chairman, I'm sorry about this, but I think it is important. I will happily submit this as evidence as well. What happened? A document was published by the Atlantic Council in the US. And this document went through all how they believed Russian influence across the European Union and European states, and who the actors were, who the principal people. And in it, they spent a lot of time looking at Nigel Farage, Aaron Banks, Douglas Carswell of all people, and a few others. And they made very specific claims. They then did a press conference where they absolutely reiterated the point that Aaron Banks was a Russian agent and actor and a man of influence controlled by the Kremlin. They made that statement.
And called the Kremlin's Trojan horse. That was
which we obviously then had to take action about. So we got our lawyers, Mishcon Derea, to write not just to them, but to 3 MPs who'd been saying this to United States officials. Aaron Banks, you must be careful, he's a Russian agent. And they did, and they wrote a very comprehensive defence of that, which will allow you to see, and please publish. What then subsequently happened? We got accused of all sorts of things in relation to Russia. Ben Bradshaw stood up in Parliament, Chris Bryant stood up in Parliament, dark money, dark Russian money, all came back to this man and various other lead campaign groups or organisations. It is at that point then you start to take the mickey or start to think this is absurd, do what I did with journalists, because you cannot take it seriously, because how on earth could they conceive that? So, with that in mind, it then became something that we became quite sensitive to. So when you got the governor of Mississippi as one of your friends, you've met the new president-elect, etc. We thought it was important, if we were going to be invited to the White House or even be entertained in any way, shape or form by the new president's team, we needed to be pretty open about what we'd done and how we'd done it because of this allegation. So I made a point of reaching out to a few of my contacts who I'd known in the security industry anyway, which is absolutely fine. But the person that gave us the best advice was the former Chief of Staff of David Cameron's office, Alex Dean. He said, you really need to go and see the United States Embassy's people, and you need to tell them things, you need to tell them everything. So I reached out, I got in touch with this particular individual, and these emails I have here for you, you can read them for yourselves. And we met on numerous occasions. He was interested then in 2 other things. He wanted to meet Paul Nuttall, and he went up to the Stoke by-election to look at what was going on there. Had a very good time, he said. And he wanted to meet Nigel Farage, but he wanted to introduce the big London boss to Nigel, so Nigel could explain to him some of the allegations that were made about him. And I arranged that meeting. There was all in there. They had a good chat. We continued in communication at any time that we thought there was something sensitive they needed to know. So it's not like we weren't aware of the sensitivities of this. I will absolutely give to your committee every email I have that went between myself and the various individuals and the Russian embassy. You can see them for yourselves. A lot of them are very boring and dull, inviting us to various cultural events. But this information I have here, which I put in a brown note, so top secret. That is all the emails. I have redacted the names. I have informed the US Embassy that I am going to do this for you because I think it's important in relation to everything that we've been accused of, that you see this. If you want to speak to the security services, the United States Embassy, please do, because we have been pretty open about everything that we have done. We've done nothing sinister. We've had a couple of great lunches. By the way, the ambassador of Russia, he was very generous to us. His wife cooked us the food, which was fantastic. He is one of the seasoned diplomats of London. He gets on with pretty much most of the diplomatic
community. What we're trying to say is we briefed the American security services on everything that had transpired.
Yeah.
And that's for you.
So in there, you'll say that in there is the record of your contact with the Americans and
Correct.
also with the Russian embassy as well.
No, I will do that separately for you, so that you'll have that. But I've redacted the names so you know.
And left the titles and the embassy stuff.
So you know who they are.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's for theatre.
Yeah. There's one question I want to put to you, Andy Wigmore, based on something that I've been told about the contents of the emails, and hopefully this will be answered when you supply that evidence to the committee. And that's
stolen emails.
Sorry. Say. Yeah. Well, I suppose the question of who sold them, as a matter of debate.
But bearing in mind we're, very concerned with the theft of data and theft of emails. It is a somewhat ironic position to be quoting stolen material. It was stolen for Isabel Egshot, then regurgitated in the Guardian and Byline. I'm not sure it's even appropriate to be asking a question about that.
Well, I'm not intending to quote from emails, we've received, the
emails that appeared in the Sunday Times. By the way, I gave the Sunday Times those emails, just so you know.
But I just want to ask you, Andy, you said you passed on telephone number for the Trump transition team to the Russian. I mean, did you routinely pass on information, documents, to the Russians?
No.
On any other occasion?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. What documents?
What sensitive? I mean, I categorically say that no, we didn't. But what?
I gave you a copy of my book. By the way, if that is an encyclopedia of what went on during the Brexit campaign, then that's an absolute.
We had no sensitive information from which to.
Well, it doesn't have to be sensitive. It could just be things you might think people might find of interest or.
You mean gossip? Can I tell you what we talked about?
No, not gossip.
No, I will tell you exactly what we talked about because this is also relevant. My dad had just died. My dad worked in Berlin during the Cold War in a place called the Berlin Air Safety Centre, which was an organisation which looks after the air corridors. They worked with the Soviets 24/7. My dad interacted with the Soviets. I grew up in that environment in Berlin. I met many of the Soviets. I was fascinated by everything that went on in Berlin during the Cold War. We talked about what my father did, what my father interacted with, etc. This is a time when the last spy swap on Glienicke Bridge happened. Dr. Zakharov, the Russian Jewish dissident, the building that my father worked in, which is the Allied Control Authority building, was fascinating. The Soviets used to use this as a benchmark of why West Berlin and East Berlin and the cooperation, all those things, all the political things that were going on. So we talked about that at length. We talked about the fact that my dad dragged me out of bed at some ungodly unearthly hour to go and watch a piece of history, which was the last spy swap on Glienicke Bridge. When it was there, when I was experiencing it, it meant nothing. In hindsight, it means everything. It's fascinating. So I saw all of that in the early days. And the ambassador was actually genuinely interested because he was very familiar with Berlin, East Berlin, and the Cold War. Why wouldn't we discuss that? There's nothing secret about that. I'm writing a book about my dad's experiences. I've got photographs and letters when he died, which are fascinating. I was talking to him about that and talking to him about the Soviet officers that were there and what they did. For instance, my father invited them for the very first time to the Queen's birthday parade in Berlin. It never happened before. The way that they communicated and the way that they interacted with the Soviets. So that's what we talked about mainly, wasn't it? And gossip like that. There was nothing sensitive that we had.
It's all one of those lunches. Yeah. Just get us going and
you talk. And we got trolleyed. It was brilliant.
Yeah. So you're saying that. So you're going to supply us your email contact with Russian
all of them. Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. Well, that's.
I want to be absolutely clear. I attended 2 lunches and the one meeting with the person I was introduced to. So I don't regard this as the way it was portrayed as constant contact with the Russians. It wasn't.
By the way, the last time I saw him was at a Christmas do with my wife. and he was very generous. He was a pianist. It was fantastic. I saw Peter Oborne there, a variety of other, eminent politicians and what have you. So it wasn't unusual for politicians and journalists to go to the embassy. Yeah. And at the time, people weren't so forensically worried about Russian activity. It hadn't been talked about in the way it had. None of the issues and incidents that had occurred. I don't feel comfortable about any of those things. It kind of worries me. But at that time, we didn't think like that. There wasn't this witch hunt towards the Russian state. So it was. You had a different feeling about it.
Yeah, inside there was all of the correspondence and the meetings we had with the Americans, and we fully briefed them on everything.
So your position is, in terms of the nature of these emails, which you're going to give us with the Russian embassy, is that they principally discuss sort of social events, social meetings, and that you didn't.
It was diary arrangements.
Yeah.
And would you like to come to this cultural event?
The things separated out because Andy's a diplomat.
Yeah.
And I'm not.
Yeah.
I wasn't. So what basically happened was that I had the couple of meetings, but obviously he at that time was diplomatically seen.
I was looking for someone to invest in my small country. Another conversation we had, Lord Michael Ashcroft was involved in this. We were trying to get someone to buy and invest in the port which his bank owned, which had gone bankrupt. We were trying to get some Russian investors to do that. And so naturally, if you're a diplomat, if you're trading industry, you're sitting in front of the Russian ambassador. Do you know anyone who'd be interested in investing in a port?
I mean, as another example, we hosted at the Ritz. A dinner for all of the High Commissioners from the Caribbean.
Yes, we briefed them.
They wanted to know about Brexit. So you might as well say we saw, the entire Caribbean
the ambassador of Venezuela, the ambassador of Cuba, the ambassador of Colombia. You had pretty much the CICA, Central American Association. They were all there. They wanted to listen to, and we invited a gentleman called Mark Boliat, who was, an ardent Remainer, the former City of London chief executive. He explained to them how he viewed it, and then we had on the other side someone who explained how they viewed it. So that we did this kind of briefing in the diplomats.
In the Bad Boys Brexit, towards the end of the book, you talk about George Cottrell's arrest in Chicago, and I think you were standing
I was right next to him
when he was arrested, and that when I think Nigel received from the FBI the charge sheet against him, and that you discussed in the book, you were all quite shocked about that.
Genuinely.
Yeah. Did you discuss that, George Cottrell's arrest with the Russian embassy?
Never came up. Whilst at the time it probably seemed a big thing, there was so much else going on at the time. It just wasn't an issue. It never came up.
And you didn't share any information with them about it?
No, and actually we didn't know anything. This is the other thing. All we had seen was exactly what was in the press about George Cottrell. That was it.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously we're grateful for the written evidence you'll supply us, and we'll look forward to receiving the email, your copies of your emails with the Russian embassy as well.
You can have full access.
Are there any other questions? Chris Matson.
Mr. Wigmore, if you're a diplomat,
former
diplomat,
I got sacked by Boris.
And if you're representing another country, why was it appropriate for you to get involved in these projects?
I'm passionate about the Commonwealth. I always have been. Belize is a Commonwealth nation, a realm country. Queen is still head of state. My mother is Belizean. I have spent my entire life, most of my entire life, apart from travelling with my parents who were in the forces, in this country. I love this country. I love Belize. And I had the ability to help my small country, which I equally love. And so when you're a diplomat and when you try and make the best for your country, you do. For me, the EU could mean huge, great big things and opportunities for tiny countries like Belize, who rely on all sorts of issues which they find difficult. Selling sugar, selling bananas, aquaculture. Belize is banned from aquaculture, selling aquaculture into the EU. Why? God knows. But you try and help that small country lobby yourselves and MEPs to try and make them understand. And the Commonwealth was a fantastic conduit for doing that. So my motivation for Brexit, being involved in Brexit, was very purely a very selfish one and not the broad picture. I had very specific views.
You didn't answer the question. You're British as well, aren't you?
I am British as well. I'm a dual citizen, yeah.
Mr. Banks, have you got a Belize passport?
No.
Okay.
I was at one point the Belizean
honorary consul to Wales.
To Cardiff.
Wales. It was Wales, actually.
Which was...
And why is that? It's important. And by the way, when he gave his £1 million to UKIP, we were holding at his house we were holding an event for the Blease Children's Trust. Why? Because he had helped build a children's hospital in Blease way before any of all of this. He had helped try and encourage people to invest in the country. And so they saw businessmen like that. Well, we need people like you to sell our country. So that's how they viewed him.
But you don't get a passport as
no, you don't. You're not a citizen.
No.
When you were having some of these business dealings with Russia and looking at possibly investing in there and the such like, did you ever have any brushes, and I mean threatening brushes as opposed to collaborative brushes, with Russian organised crime?
Well, I think I've been very clear. I've had no involvement in Russian business or any investment. So my only discussion was the one meeting with the guy mentioned in the Sunday Times, who we then took the opportunity to Lord Guthrie. He said, be very careful of the Russians. I mean, there's a Russian expression, what's mine is mine and what's yours could be mine, you know. So it's quite a difficult place to do business. So he then passed us on to Peter Hambro, that was chairman of a major listed gold company, and that's where it fizzled out. But I do, you know, accept the point that you can say, well, you link all the things together, but in business you have many conversations, but a lot of them never lead to anything. So my point would be, just because you have lunch with someone or have a discussion does not then lead on to, you know,
can we? And if we just take it from...
But I haven't had any dealings with Russian organised crime, if that's the question.
Yeah, threatening is what I thought.
What, threatening to me?
No. You were being the one being threatened.
No, I don't.
Let's just take it away from the ambassador a minute. Of course, there are other employees at the Russian embassy. Yeah. Would you have had meetings lower down?
No. By the way, the last time I went to the embassy was to actually help him get his passports done.
Yeah.
And that was because I lived nearby, and he said, could you go and stand in a queue, which I did, for a very long time, to get his son's passport.
My three children have got Russian passports and British passports because they've got dual nationality.
How did the two of you meet? You seem to be on very good terms. How did you meet?
We've been working on a referendum for 2.5 years.
Because when I told you...
Who introduced you?
Who introduced us? It was the happy hippie.
Jimbo, wasn't it?
Yeah. So my old friend's a guy called James Pryor, who used to work for the Tory Party Central Office and used to work for Jimmy Goldsmith.
He ran the referendum campaign.
Yeah. So he was doing some work with him. I was also doing this regulatory consultative group work with the Ministry of Justice on controlling claims management companies and what have you. And I've worked in a number of insurance companies anyway. So we naturally met ages ago. Whenever it was, I can't even remember. And yeah, I like him.
Yeah, that's clear. Can I just ask, Mr. Banks, how much money did you give in donation to the Leave side of the referendum?
Well, I think that's in our submission to the Electoral Commission. I mean, it's lent in various forms, so I don't have the information to my fingertips, but the Electoral Commission submission is accurate.
9.6 million, I think, is the figure there. Does that sound about right?
I'm not. I honestly, I would have to go back and check the Electoral Commission submission.
Your favourite newspaper, The Guardian, suggested that there was an additional 12.4 million in services provided to Leave.eu from Better for the Country.
Well, you raise a very valuable point, because the Guardian newspaper had to print 3 corrections in response to their, ludicrously poor reporting. And one of those was the headline that you're referring to, which, if you go online and check, they had to take down and change. So we've actually got a letter from Mishcons from the Guardian accepting the correction and printing the correction.
So the 12.4 million addition isn't correct?
It's certainly not correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I know the difference between 22 million and 9 million.
Can I just ask you a couple of questions about your own...
But can I just say that it does rather illustrate the point, doesn't it? You read a Guardian report that has a willfully misleading headline in it, and then and I don't blame you read it, and so you're entitled to believe, well, it's probably true. But then, of course, what happens is they bury the correction on page 55, they put it at the bottom of the website, and they don't publicise the website. So you're asking me a question which you have seen, and that's how fake news, in many cases, spreads. Because, I mean, you're interested in the subject, a lot of your constituents that open a newspaper, read the headline, and it's not just us. I mean, it would relate to an article about any of you. That you read it and you think it's true, and therefore the body of allegations finally in the end builds up to something that.
And I take that, but earlier you both talked about the fact that you like to tease or embellish or.
Can you blame us? You think of the attacks we've had and the accusations. I mean, is it any wonder we turn around and stick two fingers up occasionally and laugh at it, because it is so absurd? Some of it.
If we'd not approached this with some sense of humour,
we'd be locked up.
We'd be locked up in a prison.
I hope you don't think I'm humorous.
I think you've got a bit more humour.
I think it was a rather unfair slur of my colleague.
At least Ian's read the book, Chris.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to be rude, but Mr. Collins did say it was 20 minutes, and we've got places to be.
Right. Are there any final? Lee and Lucas, and then I think that'll be it.
Do you want us to sign the book, Ian?
I actually, you said 20 minutes, and I genuinely do have another appointment which I don't want to be late for.
And is it just one or two questions here?
I really had to insist. I was told a certain time, and we've got a luncheon appointment we don't want to be late for.
I think
actually you can join us. You can join us if you want. We'll be in the
so Jamie, the part. Does someone want to take a copy?
Mr. Max, could you just give us 5 minutes of your time?
No. You said when you left 20 minutes, and now we've run way past 20 minutes. So I'm sorry, but I'm afraid it's time to go. But I think we've been as open as we could be with the issues you've raised.
Yeah, I think I appreciate the time, but it'd be great if you could just give us 5 minutes and Mr. Lucas finish this question. You sure?
No. The word is no. When you went out, you said 20 minutes, and I think we've run past 20 minutes, and I'm sorry, but there it is.
Okay, well, Mr. Lucas said he doesn't wish to pursue his question, so we'll leave it there.
And thank you very much for listening patiently to the answer.
And then if you want to leave, either with us or with the committee clerks, the documents.
So I'm sorry about that, but we're late.
But if you have anything else, can you send it in writing questions? Yes, absolutely. I should have mentioned as well.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.